All right. I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, October 1st, 2024. We're meeting in a hybrid format tonight with Board Member Noor joining us via Zoom tonight. I apologize for those looking at home. My video is a little broken. So we're going to go ahead and call the roll, and then we're going to be moving into executive session tonight. And then we'll come back for the other opening meetings and then to go into public comment. So with that, Dr. Scallon, could you please call the roll?
Board Member Ali. Board Member Bilyeu. Vice Chair Bondo.
Présent.
Board Member Bryden.
Here.
Board Member Figdor.
Here.
Board Member Grant. Here. Board Member Noor.
Here.
Board Member Opperman.
Here.
Student Representative Hayden. Student Representative Kantipa. Student Representative Knight. Student Representative McDonald. Student Representative Rosado. Student Representative Kunku. Chair Lentz.
Here. Thank you for that. And for executive session, I'll be looking for a motion for the consideration action to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056D to discuss education technician negotiations. Thank you, Board Member Opperman, for that motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Board Member Bryden. All those in favor? By show of hands. Okay, we'll move into executive session. The exception to that is Board Member Grant will be staying out here, so he is not involved with the staff negotiations. All right. Thank you all for your patience. With that, I'm really excited to say that we have reached a tentative agreement in negotiations after a long amount of work and commitment to being open-minded and really continuing to center these vital staff in our district. So what that means now, we are in tentative agreement, and we will, the EdTech Union will review the contract, and then it will come back to the board after it is ratified there. I really want to thank everyone that was involved in these processes, and that means from our lawyers to the superintendent to EdTech negotiators to every EdTech that has come to a meeting, that has reached out to us by email, that has had conversations with us. We've heard your concerns, and we really believe that we have a contract now that's on the table that values every member of this unit. So thank you all for being here tonight and for being part of the process. We look forward to ratifying it soon, so thank you very much. All right, with that done, we're now going to do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Wolastoqiyik or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy or People of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. As a reminder of our mission, the Portland Public Schools is responsible for ensuring a challenging, relevant, and joyful education that empowers every learner to make a difference in the world. We build relationships among families, educators, and the community to promote the healthy development and academic achievement of every learner. And our definition of equity is that equity is all people being held to high expectations and having access to opportunities that are reflective of their individual needs, identities, and experiences. Equity is achieved in Portland Public Schools when there are no identifiable differences in outcomes and experiences for any population subgroup. And now we'll move on to public comment. If you would like to give public comment, please come up to the podium or raise your hand on Zoom. And if we have people here to give public comment, I'll go over the guidelines. Yep. So as a reminder about public comment, members of the public may speak on any subject directly related to the operations of the schools, except for personnel matters or complaints concerning specific employees or students, which shall be addressed through established policies and procedures. If an item is on the agenda, please use the public comment time associated with that item. Comments are limited to a maximum of 3 minutes or 6 minutes for individuals using an interpreter to make their comment. Individuals may not relinquish a portion of their allotted time to another speaker. The board may not respond to comments, and please refrain from responding in the audience. Speakers may refrain from engaging in speakers must refrain from engaging in disruptive conduct, including but not limited to using vulgar and/or obscene language, threatening others using words or by actions, using pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or any other identity factor, making defamatory comments, exceeding the allotted time limits, talking over, interrupting others, offering repetitive comments, and offering comment on matters unrelated to the school district's programs, policies, or operations. I will stop any public comment that is contrary to these rules. To give public comment, please come forward to the podium or raise your hand in Zoom. Please begin by introducing yourself with your name and address, and we'll alternate if needed. I'll keep the time and will raise a yellow folder indicating that you have 30 seconds remaining and a red folder signifying the end of your time. If you get to the end of your allotted time and would like to request more time, you may do so. With that, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Mano Ali. I live here in Portland on 184 Pearl Street. I do have before I begin, I have something I'd like to share with everybody to read before I don't know, I can pass it along to everybody?
Yeah, you could start right down there. Thank you, Board Member Opperman.
Oh, sorry, there's also this one. Okay. Let's start. So my name is Mano, and I stand before you as an alumni of Portland Public Schools, a student, an employee, and a member of the community. A daughter, a sister, and most importantly, someone who loves and serves her community with all her heart. But tonight, my heart is heavy. On September 13, 2024, I was approached by an individual who put me in fear and traumatized me for the rest of my experience working at Portland Public Schools. This person approached me with a face mask that is scary. This person approached me and looked at me and threatened me in a manner that has put me in fear. They approached me, and the first instinct I had was, this is my end. This person walked past my room, and they didn't come back. The police was called by my colleagues. The police showed up. The police asked whoever was in charge that day, and that was Ryan Scallon. He is the leader of Central Office, the leader of Portland Public Schools. The police said it was a prank, and it was an employee that did it. Ryan Scallon did not reach out to me for more than 3 days. I was alone I was in fear, and no leader came to me and spoke to me and asked how I was doing. I am angry and frustrated that this wasn't discussed with the district, that it wasn't discussed with me, or there was no compassion to me. The letter that you have in front of you is a letter that was sent by other people who were impacted by what happened. I took matters into my own hand. I reached out to the board. Sarah Lentz sent me an email, and she wrote that this was a playful act. There is nothing playful about coming to somebody's office and scaring them and putting them in a life-threatening position. No one should come into Portland Public Schools with fear. This is a diverse community. There are so many people that come from so many different walks of life. I come to work happy. I shouldn't be put in a place of fear. I shouldn't be put in a place of anger. I shouldn't be put in a place of having no trust by the leaders that are already there. But to say that this is a playful act is something that is inconsiderate, and it's not listening to what I had to say. I am asking all of you to listen to what I'm saying, because I don't think this is being taken seriously. I'm asking for justice. I'm asking for a better Portland Public Schools, because central office is the backbone of what's happening in the schools. We do onboarding, we do hiring, we reached out to people constantly, and
30 seconds.
we reach out to people constantly, and there's no hope for me. So I'm asking you for your help and your assistance in taking matters, in taking this situation more seriously. Because that email left me with more fear that this is not going to be taken seriously. And I want to ask for more time, please.
I'm happy to give you 30 more seconds.
Okay. Black women like myself face neglect every day in health, in schools, and across America. We are constantly left alone. That is how I felt on that day, and leadership failed to take action. Please, I'm asking you to I'm not even asking anymore, because clearly this is something that was put under the rug, and I'm requesting that the district does something about this. And I'm asking for all of your help. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like for, the offer that I also put in the email was to have multiple conversations with you and to engage in a conversation, and that offer still stands. And I would like to take you up on that if that's something that you're open to.
I reached out. Your response was that this was a playful act. There's nothing playful about putting my life in threat.
I understand your frustration. Go ahead, Maureen.
Hi, my name is Maureen Clancy. I'm a central office staff member, and I was here asked to speak in support of our office. On September 13th, I arrived at the office a couple hours after the incident occurred, but it was immediately clear that the staff had been through a traumatizing event and were still affected in trying to process what had occurred. Staff complained of headaches and stomach aches. I spoke with Mono later in the day and could feel her anxiety and overwhelming fear. And I spoke with other HR staff and heard their fear come through and their anxiety about how to support their fellow staff. As a district, some of our top goals are to develop and implement a plan to advance staff mindsets and cultural humility, to refine and implement a shared vision for a strong and inclusive staff culture where staff are valued, affirmed, effective, and supportive. It is clear we have some work to do and that this event poses an opportunity to speak with and train staff and help make clear how other people, cultures, and groups experience situations. We need to be able to clearly address the issue and understand the cultural complexities that occurred and must be addressed. I have quickly learned in my years of working at the multilingual office that issues around dress up, Halloween, spirits, haunting are very different depending on your country of origin, your religion, your past experiences, and your cultural norms. How these issues vary by community and culture should be considered and included in anything that is part of our school district. I am also clear that we do not all walk through our days or through the world in the same way. We have different experience, we get different reactions, we come in touch with microaggressions as part of our daily lives. All of these influence how we move through our world and how we get treated and how we react to various situations. We have many staff who have experienced traumas like war, genocide, running for their lives, abuse, and gun violence. The event occurred and cannot be taken back. But what we do following an event like this is vital to the ensuring that our community, the Portland Public Schools Central Office community, is whole. That there is learning and better understanding of the different experience, that there is clear evidence of care for those who are most deeply affected, and clear guidelines on what is and is not expected or tolerated. This is where there is work to do and repair to be made. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to give public comment? Coming up.
I'm MainePERS. I live on 4 Gorham Street in Wiscasset. I'm here to speak as an individual in regard to what happened on Friday, September 13th, 2024. A young Black Muslim woman was severely victimized by an employee at central office. The people who were supposed to stand up with her told her that it was a prank. The entire body of this Portland Public School Board responded how sorry they are for their tardy responses on Tuesday, September 17th, with an opening statement that says, "Your email went to the junk mail and spam." How could that happen in the same building? Imagine to use an excuse like that for their late responses, that the victim has to email you and respond it late is beyond my imagination. You should have been in her office after the incident and telling her how this behavior is highly unacceptable and intolerable coming from people from central office. The person responsible should have been dismissed immediately. And one of the email responses stated that this incident is an example, quote unquote, this incident is an example of someone intending to do something positive, but having an impact that is so harmful. Seriously? I can't believe this. I can't believe that this, stupid comment actually came from the Portland Public Schools leaders, where the student body comprised of about 40% of students who speak more than 57 languages. The chair just mentioned about the equity to hold all people to high standards. And I hope that that will happen. If this young Black Muslim woman, who was an alumni of the Portland Public Schools, decides to report this incident to the Office of the Civil Rights, I will fully support her, and I will do anything to make sure that that person is no longer here at the Portland Public School, especially in central office. I'm not young anymore. I have gone through a lot, but this needs to be addressed in the way that it should be if it's somebody who's not in central office does this. So I thank you for the time to listen to my testimony.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah Talan. I live on 42 South Street in Freeport. I joined Portland schools when I was 26 years old. Mano represents young me. She joined this system, school system, when she was 24 years old. I have been through a lot until the payback report came, which echoed every little experience that I had in this organization. It hurts to see another young Hannah suffering and being dismissed, neglected, and undermined by her administrators who are knowledgeable of the racism this organization allows for Black, brown, especially Muslim people. It's too close to me to see Mano hurt and cry, and nobody lent a hand and said, "What can we do for you? What happened to you?" I called what happened to her targeted terrorizing. It's targeted terrorizing because in the corner her office is, the person stood in front of her for a minute, threatening her life. And if it wasn't deliberate and intentional terrorizing, the person would have taken off the mask after looking at her face and feeling the terror on Mana's face, would have said, "I am so sorry I was playing with you." Then what the administrators called the positive act and prank would have been true today. But I'm sorry to say that that did not happen. I'm very disappointed in 2024 that we're dealing with this. And I assure you, it happens in every building in this organization. So please take the advice of the victim, Mano, and other adults that saw what happened and take action to root out racism, discrimination, undermining, dismissing people who 100% belong in this organization because they're invested in it for their communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not sure if this is allowed. I have a staff member who is uncomfortable sharing her own views.
You can read it for her.
So she wrote them down? Okay. I was the staff member who covered the front desk and dialed 911 at the urgent request of another staff member on Friday, September 13th. While I didn't see the masked person myself, I did experience the firsthand the fear that person caused. I witnessed a parent with her young children fearfully ushered out of the main lobby so they could seek safety behind a locked door. I witnessed those I considered colleagues and friends overwhelmed with panic and fear, only to have those emotions replaced with confusion, pain, and anger once word spread that the incident was a prank. There were many questions exchanged in the aftermath of this incident. The ones that were repeated were, why? How could a person do this? How could a person here do this to us? What was the person thinking? How could that person think this was funny? While there are no answers to those questions that could fully satisfy our need for understanding, there are answers to questions that could help us move forward. How can we adequately prepare staff for emergencies? How can something like this be better communicated with urgency? How can we support those affected in the aftermath? What additional resources or training can we provide to prevent this from happening again? How can we ensure that everyone feels safe and informed moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room or online that would like to give public comment? With that, I'm going to close public comment. And I will, I think what is tough about what happened, I think the board unanimously condemns what happened. It should not have happened. but there's a tension between kind of what happened and what we can say publicly because it involves our staff. And so it's very hard to navigate. And I'm sorry that that tension exists, because I think if we could all sit down in a room together and talk to one another more openly, it would be easier to manage the situation. And I'm sorry that we couldn't do that. And I'm sorry that we couldn't be more urgent. And what you said, that this happens in every building, I know that. That is so true. And if this is the way that we're interacting with each other as staff, I'm sure this is the way that we are interacting with each other as students and as a community, and that is not okay. And this board universally condemns that. And I would like to apologize that my email came across the way that it did. My intention of my email was to say that this was a poor decision on somebody's behalf. And their intention did not meet their impact, and their impact was horrible. And I'm sorry that my email did not justify or capture that. And I would like to offer another conversation if that works for any of you that would like to talk further. I'm open to that. And I think I'll just close on this last note, that this is like something that we just can't flip a switch on, right? Like, it requires so much conversation, so much training, so much practice to get better at this. And I am 100% committed to that work. I think this board is 100% committed to that work, but it is hard, and we're not going to get it right all the time. And we've got to be working with each other in that work. And that is what I'm vowing to you, is I'm not going to ignore what you have to say. I'm going to try my best to listen deeply and respond with the power that we have to make this district better and safe for all in it. And so I apologize again, and I will do my best to be better moving forward.
Sarah, can I just say something?
Yes.
Mano is my friend, and I want to take accountability for not knowing this and not being aware and not being able to use my space to ensure that you are okay, because you're more than just a community member. You are my friend, and you are somebody that I care about and that I want to create resources for. So I am so sorry that this happened to you. And I'm not crying because, I'm in a position of anything, but I take accountability for not being in a position to be aware about what is happening to you and what is happening to other people like you and other people like me. And that is a responsibility that I have to take accountability for, and I have to be honest about, and all of us have to be honest about it. We're not creating safe spaces for people, and we don't have a safe school system, and it's okay to admit that. It's okay to know that that is where we are. And I just want you to know that I want to thank you for the courage, and I am glad, you even got it to this point, because this is what happens, right? We're not informed. We don't know the day-to-day. We don't have an awareness of how our people are being seen and treated. And so you taking this step is an opportunity for us to do more and be more accountable of the ways in which we're taking up this space. So I just thank you for doing that work, because that is informing us. You are telling us that we need to do better, and we have to be better for not only you, but everybody else. So thank you, and I am so sorry that you had to come here for us to even hear about what you went through, and that you had to stand in that podium to just make people understand how you were terrified. So thank you.
I'm actually going to move us to just a short recess for 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back at 7:50.
Right.
I know we've got a lengthy agenda still in front of us, so I'm going to skip any remarks I have. We don't have student remarks, so I'm going to queue up Dr. Scallon when he is ready.
No.
We're not. We're just going to drive the way that it is.
Good evening, everyone. This month in Portland Public Schools, if we think about the month as not just being the start of October, but if we think of it as sort of 15 days before and 15 days after, there's been a number of spaces where we have been celebrating the diversity within our schools. And so I just want to call out a handful of them. First, last week was International Deaf Week. And so as home of a number of students through Baxter, we have celebrated that. We're in the middle of Hispanic Heritage Month within our schools. And so that is an exciting piece that each of our schools celebrates differently. And so we'll hear a little bit of that, I think, within the elementary school update, perhaps. But if not, if you are listening at home and you ask your son or daughter, you will hear about a number of ways that that is celebrated within their schools. Third, as you can see at the bottom, we have Wabanaki studies going on, and many of our students at the elementary school level are experiencing either very soon or just got done with field work. And so that is going on. And then last, there was an experience about a week ago through the Foundation for Portland Public Schools, where our very own student representative, Hayden, as well as another student and alumni shared out on the Jewish experience in the Portland Public Schools. And so we are capturing our diversity across all ranges in both community events as well as within our schools. And so it's been very exciting to participate and to see that. Second, our district and our schools have great staff which continue to be recognized for their contributions. Just this last week, the state of Maine announced their Teacher Leader Fellows. This is a cohort of 6 extraordinary educators from across the state. These educators will share their expertise in civics, personal finance, integrated arts, and multilingual learning, including teaching multilingual learners with disabilities to educators across the state to share that expertise. And we had 2 of the 6 are in Portland Public Schools, Joshua Chard and Melissa Franz. And so just want to really recognize their contributions, both within our schools as well as across the state. And so just congratulations to them for that recognition. And then last is there's an opportunity here for both the board as well as members of the public, and just a recognition of some excitement of going around in our schools is the Maine Supreme Court will hear arguments at Deering High School on October 9th. This is something that happens every year for about the last 2 decades that the Supreme Court has held oral arguments in appeals of real cases, and they take place in Maine high schools, and students at Deering, Portland, and Casco Bay will all have an opportunity to attend and participate, and that is on October 9th. And I do think there is a little bit of an opportunity for the public to at least hear about that. I'm not sure about attending, but maybe if you get in line and try to look through the window, you can participate on that. So just an exciting opportunity for our students within Portland Public Schools. I have a couple other things I'll be sharing out today, but that's the quick update from the superintendent.
Perfect. And then we're going to move to our elementary schools update. Do you want to give a
Yes.
little context?
Let me give a little context on that, because that is just an exciting piece that we're going to do starting in October. Is we wanted to be able to have our assistant superintendents share an update of what's going on in the schools so that you as the board members and as the community could get a real sense of what's going on sort of behind the walls of both inside the building and in the classrooms. And so the first meeting of the month, the assistant superintendent for elementary schools, Dr. Atkinson-Duina, will be sharing out. And then the second meeting of the month, Dr. Ahmed for the secondary schools will be sharing out. This is a new format for us, so we're going to give it a try this month, get some feedback after we see how it goes. But really excited to welcome up Dr. Atkinson-Duina to share a behind the scenes of what's going on in our elementary schools. So happy to pass it to you.
All right, thank you. Are you able to go through the slides?
I am. I just stopped my share, so let me pull them up real quick. Just give me a second.
Yeah. as we start this routine, I'd love it if, if you let me or Dr. Scallon know if there are any particular topics that you'd like to see in the updates. And just to let you know, I have tried to keep from overlapping too much with our major strategic plan updates just to avoid duplication. So.
Whoa, let me just get the Zoom right here. All right, there you go.
All right, thank you. You can move on. I'm just going to give a quick outline. This report will include an overview of the elementary team, September highlights from the elementary level, 2 brief updates on our work, and 1 ask of board members. It includes a lot of pictures, and I hope that they help to give you a feel for the elementary experience, which is often a child's first experience with school and a real opportunity to shape a child's relationship with formal education. So just as way of introductions, I'd like to introduce our elementary network team, which is part of our new organizational structure. It includes 4 core network positions and 3 curriculum support positions. So these are the people who help to lead, coordinate, plan, and support our key initiatives district-wide. You know many of them. Jesse Robinson is our Director of Academics. Carlos Gomez is our Director of Language Development and ESOL. Joanna Frankel, who will be presenting or helping to present later tonight, is our Director of Culture and Climate. Our Director of Special Education position is currently vacant, which is a real gap. So if you know someone who loves kids, has expertise in special education, and is a leader with strong executive skills, please send them our way. And then in our curriculum support positions, we have Fiona Hopper, our curriculum developer for Wabanaki and Black History, Katie West, our coordinator for environmental and experiential learning, and Karen Scheibels, our mobile makerspace teacher. I'm not going to go through all the names tonight, but I do want to recognize our elementary principals, lead teachers, and assistant principals. As you may know, October is National Principals Month, and it's a great time to show appreciation for school leaders. And I just want to say personally that it is a great honor to work with this group of educational leaders. They are out in front every day, setting the direction for their school community, responding to students, staff, and families. And even the district. So I also, the last 6 here are assistant principals. And then on the next slide, I just want to say that, many people have said that a school leader's job is too hard to do if you can't find joy in it. And so finding joy in our schools with students, families, and colleagues is a place where our elementary school leaders really excel. Then just some highlights from the month of September. These photos show a smattering of experiences that students and families have had in our elementary schools this past month. We have welcomed new and old families at our school open houses and at curriculum nights. We have engaged with community partners, like this example of a bike rodeo at Lyseth held in partnership with the Bicycle Coalition of Maine. Also, Miss Weeks' 4th grade class at Ocean studied the butterfly's life cycle. And in the fall, this is a common sight across elementary schools. We also had a visit from the mayor and great celebrations at our newly remodeled buildings, Presumpscot, Longfellow, and Reiki. And I just want to say again how thankful we are to the Portland community for creating great spaces for our young learners to start their school experiences. We also, Dr. Scallon has already mentioned, you can move the slides, that September is also the time when about our field experiences. So this is the time when our 3rd graders all across the district engage in Wabanaki Studies and Science Integrated Unit focused on the Presumpscot River. The compelling question that unit asks students to consider is, what does it mean to be a water protector? And if you aren't already following outdoor learning at PPS, I encourage you to do so. Our next fieldwork experience for elementary students is coming up soon at Mackworth Island and is also part of a unit on geography and the history of the Dawnland people, and that is for fourth graders. We are supported in this work, you can go to the next slide, by local community members. And in this picture, we have Harley Bassett. He's a Passamaquoddy citizen and a father of a daughter at one of our schools. And he helped to lead one of the field workstations this year with the third graders. So we're very appreciative of that work. The next two items that I just want to bring to your attention. One is a strength that I think we're building, and the other is a challenge that we're facing. You've already heard around Strategic Initiative 2.1 a lot about our curriculum implementation efforts in English language arts. Another piece of this strategic work has been focused on strengthening our reading intervention model. So new this year across all elementary schools and is an assessment tool called MClass that is used to assess foundational reading skills and also monitor progress for students who need intervention support. And then also we trained over the summer and in this early fall, 48 teachers across our 9 elementary schools and 6 secondary schools in the Orton-Gillingham approach to reading intervention, which is an evidence-based approach. And in this next photo, you can see Andrea Romer, one of our newly hired reading specialists, working with a student using this multisensory approach to reading and writing. The next item I just want to highlight for you is really a challenge that we're facing in special education, and we are seeing many unexpected needs for our incoming students at the early grades. You may have read the newspaper report recently about the struggles that DHS is having. You know about the struggles that CDS is also having, and so all of whenever we aren't able to meet those needs at an early age, they come and they arrive in our schools having not had the services that they need, and we are seeing the repercussions of that. So you may remember that we opened a new class right before school started to support students with autism spectrum disorder. So that class is up and running at East End. Our student services team is continuing to look into the high needs that we are seeing across the district. Early data indicates that we need more capacity for serving and perhaps more classrooms, specialized classrooms. I just want to note that staffing is a challenge across the board in special education, but especially in our specialized programs. And then finally, I have one ask. It's a fun ask, so I hope you'll take me up on it, of board members. We'd love to have you help out with our Row Recess Runners. So the Recess Runners program is designed to make physical exercise enjoyable for students, and you can reach out to PE teacher Renee Cousteau at Row if you can help out. So thank you very much for your time this evening. If anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much. Just because of the length of our agenda tonight, I'm going to ask people to reach out to you directly with questions. But Ms. Bondo has a very important one. So, okay. Okay, go for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Atkinson, for the presentation. I just need to see on the strategy 2.1, we just talked about the monitoring assessment and the training then the teacher went through. So how often they have to have those training done, and how many times do we need to do those assessments so we can see the progress?
Yeah, so we do the assessment. We do it with almost all students 3 times a year. For students who are in intervention, so they go and the team decides that they could use additional support in reading, they would have the assessment done more frequently. Probably every 3 to 6 weeks is not unusual at that time. And as far as the training, what we did, this is, I would say, an initial level of training in Orton Gillingham. So it was 30 hours of training that those 48 staff members receive. And it now allowed them to have a certificate in order to provide the program to students in our schools. I think we will have continue that work so that staff will continue to advance in that reading approach. We do not yet have a plan for that, but I expect you would see something in the budget for the upcoming year.
Okay, but those teachers, they are all teachers across all our elementary schools, right?
That's correct. So across all 9 elementary schools, we have teachers who have been trained.
Okay. My last question is about the spectrum on the autism. Do you know how many students we have under that spectrum on the top of your head, or maybe not?
Yeah, no, I mean, we could get that data, but it really is a wide range, and we have many students that might be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder who are in our regular classrooms. But there are certain cases where it would be more appropriate to have specialized instruction in classes.
Yeah,
So,
and can we know maybe just a follow-up questions through emails, the load that we have now and the ratio by the support we know then we do have, because we have a challenge of staffing. So I just wonder what the specific load we have and the ratio by the support that we have right now.
yeah, okay. We can follow up with that.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Aki. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Very quick follow-up. So the Orton Gillingham training to the 48 staff members, I'm curious about whether they're all teachers or whether that would also encompass ed techs who are providing services to students who need support.
I'd have to go back and check on the list. We did prioritize funding to staff and our reading specialists who were going to be providing interventions on a regular basis. So, but I don't want to speak and say,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you for these updates. I think they're going to be really helpful for the board, so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, we have the Foundation for Portland Public Schools quarterly report.
Could you share the slides again? I think that it's, if you don't mind. Great. It's hard to believe it's already the October quarterly report. I feel like I just gave one. It's pumpkin latte season. I'm waiting for our slides to come up. Thank you. Okay, so I can jump right to the second slide. You should have all received today an email that included our annual report. It just was released today, which is very exciting. You can click on it on our website or in the email you all received. But also wanted to share that we have recently finalized our audited financial statements for last year. They are also available on our website. I'd be happy to send them to the whole school board if you're interested. But the very quick summary is that our revenue for last year was $1,433,000, and that 81% of that revenue was directly invested in PPS students, staff, and families. The other 19% was for staffing and fundraising. So, move on. I'm going quickly as well. I know it's a long night. And just also another update is that we have 2 grant streams available this fall for the first time. The deadline for both of those is tomorrow. It actually closes at midnight. So for any staff who may still be listening, you can still apply for a fall equity and innovation grant. And then we've launched our first ever co-curricular grant stream this fall. And that's students or staff can apply for that. And we have received quite a few applications from students already, which is exciting. It'll be fun to review those. And at my next report and in a future email from me, you will surely see an update of who we give those grants to. But that's kind of our longest running program, and it's open until tomorrow. But another new program this fall, I did want to give an update on. So I want to give a huge credit to Tina Bayou, who brought these issues to me over the last year, but also to Lizzie Nally at Deering and to some of our social workers. A couple of critical needs that affect our students and affect their learning were brought to our attention. And one of them was vision care, and the other was the lack of free menstrual products at our secondary schools. So we started a new campaign. Well, let me back up a little bit. We met first with Greater Portland Health. We kind of tried to get, we called pretty much every local optometrist in Greater Portland, tried to get a sense of what was happening. Because most of our students do have MainePERS, which does cover vision care and does cover glasses. The problem is that when kids are flagged at school with their basic screening from their school nurses for needing a more comprehensive vision care appointment so that they can get prescription glasses, there's a giant backlog, and it's very difficult to get one of those MainePERS appointments. Some of the optometrists locally don't accept MainePERS. Those that do only have a limited number, and apparently the backlog is probably in the hundreds of students. So Greater Portland Health hired their first staff optometrist this summer, which is fabulous. And when I heard that, I said, oh, great, we don't need to do a campaign anymore. And she said, oh, please, we'll never, like, if you could help clear this backlog, it would become sustainable. So we launched this appeal where we asked if we could try to bring a vision van up to the Portland Public Schools that can serve about 30 students a day. And that would cover an optometrist giving them a full screening and then prescription glasses for that student. And thanks to one grant from the Sadie and Harry Davis Foundation, a small gift, but also a donation of time from Eyes on Rosemont, and then donations from many local donors, we've raised $21,000, and that was from 2 weeks ago, so a little more. To date, the cost of 3 days of the vision van is $21,000. And we've already put $4,000 into menstrual products at Deering. So we're not quite there, but we're close. We're close enough that we've scheduled the vans. So that is my update. They're coming January, it's something like 6th, 7th, and 8th. They'll do one day at Portland Adult Ed, where they'll see about 30 students there. Probably one day at Deering, where they can see students yet to be determined, but Deering, Lincoln, maybe Casco Bay and Lyman. We'll see how we can figure out transportation. And then one day somewhere on Peninsula to serve Portland High and King, and possibly some students from Reiki or East End. We're not going to be able to serve everyone, but if we get another grant or giant other donations, we could bring a fourth day of the van, which is on-site 2020 on-site from Massachusetts. So that's just exciting news. It's something that's happening, and certainly there's a lot of research that just shows that kids, in addition to not being able to see well, academic performance, behavior, emotional and mental health, all it improves. The numbers are drastic, what vision problems can be causing for kids in school. So we're really hopeful that this will make a big difference in some students' lives. I don't need to talk about this one because Superintendent Scallon covered it, but we had a great conversation at the Jewish Museum of Portland last weekend. And a reminder that I'm not going to do a deep dive, but this is the range of current programming we have at the foundation right now. I focused on our new and currently active programs. I also put this out, this was in the newsletter today, but we are creating a workout room in central office. We already have a stationary bike, an elliptical machine, and some weights pledged to us. But if you know of anyone seeking to donate, we're going to set that up. We'll have some waivers and try to keep that a safe and clean spot. But we are seeking those donations. We can give a tax deductible gift receipt to anyone who might like to donate. And then, as I always do, this is a summary of donations in the last quarter. So these are business and foundation donations from the date of my last quarterly report until I submitted these slides last week. So that's 248,000. So again, it's not a quarter of the year. It's just the quarter between when I last shared data to now. So those are the donations we received from local businesses. And then finally, in that time, we received 144 individual donations, totaling $21,109 to a range of our funds. And I believe that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Andy. Any questions from the board? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just to say thank you so much for this great work.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, keep up the great work. Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna go quickly through the report of the secretary. We have up for consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of September 10th. Are there any corrections to the meeting minutes for September 10th? Okay, I see no corrections, just double checking Zoom. Okay, so then if there's no corrections, the meeting minutes are approved as distributed. And now we're going to have climate and culture data with a lens on the strategic plan. I'll turn it over to you, Superintendent.
Great. Good evening again, everybody. I'm excited that tonight we will be sharing a look back on our culture and climate data from school year 23-24, but we'll be doing this with a lens of our strategic plan and thinking about what are the actions that we're taking this year in response to the data, and how does this sit within the broader picture of the work we are doing within the strategic plan. I'm going to do a quick overview to set the objectives. I was told, actually I kind of said it for myself, but I was told I had about 4 minutes to do this because we have about 70 slides of information. So I'm going to do 4 minutes of this, so pretty quickly to set the stage, and then welcome up our Senior Director of Data, as well as our 2 network leaders for climate and culture. Our objectives for this evening's session is 4 things. Is first, to ground any conversation that we have about the strategic plan in data. Second is to reflect on the patterns we see in our 23-24 climate data, including attendance, suspension, and looking at priority subgroups. 3 is to make sure that we're talking about how we're going to continue to strengthen our priority 3 area within the strategic plan, which is focused on the whole student connected community. And then 4 is to provide a brief update on what that work is that is happening this year. As a reminder, we have 10 initiatives that are ongoing work this year. What we're going to be focusing on, as you see here, is Initiative 3.1, which reads, increase the capacity of schools to create and implement whole school systems, social emotional learning curriculum, and relationships that promote a joyful, supportive, and safe school culture. The work this year is focused on reflecting, redesigning, and piloting, if necessary, work within this area. This is focused within our strategic plan mission, measures, and targets in a number of areas. And so I'm going to highlight within that ones that sit on the second page of those. And that is specifically about students reporting that they have an adult that they can connect with at school, that there's gap closure around those measures, and that the number of students that are chronically absent from school decreases from a baseline value of 26% to 15%. Those are the mission measures. Remember, those are the 5-year goals on which we are aiming within our strategic plan. We also have strategic initiative measures. These are measures that we look at each year that tell us whether or not we are moving in this direction. And there are 2 strategic measures that we are looking at within this. The first is around the number of students with 0 suspensions, whether in school or out of school. And second is the number of schools that are hitting Tier 1, their Tier 1 tiered fidelity inventory. That's right. That's a tiered TFI, which really gets at, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but that gets at their ability to have leadership teams that are truly looking at data and acting on them in a way that has an impact on student outcomes. What you can see here, and what you'll get in much more depth, is that we had 96% of students with 0 suspensions last year, 97% of students with 0 out-of-school suspensions, and 97% of students with 0 in-school suspensions. And that our number of schools hitting that goal around having effective teaming currently is at 67%, and you can see that breakdown by school. We're going to talk about this at the end of the presentation, but so that you have it in the back of your mind, there are strategies that we are doing to move forward around these strategic initiatives and to hit the 5-year mission measures. They include strengthening our implementation of positive behavior intervention and supports, which we commonly call PBIS. Second is that we have explicit social emotional learning that happens at schools. And third, and this is a new role this year, is that at the school level, we have culture and climate coordinators at the school that are championing and leading the work of making sure that our students not only have great academics, but they have happy, joyful, structured, welcoming environments in which to learn and to grow. With that in mind, if you keep those strategies, those people in mind, what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about what the data says and where we're at. And we're going to do that within the mindset of we can't get better if we don't dig in and interrogate where we're at. And then we'll talk about how we're addressing what the data tells us. And so I'm excited to welcome up Haley to really dig into what the data tells us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The good news is we're not going to go through all 70 slides tonight. We have a more extensive slide deck that will be posted, but for the sake of time, we have some sort of executive summary slides for some of the more granular disaggregations. So hopefully that's good news for everyone here. So with that, just to acclimate us to our data sources that we will be using tonight, we have 4 different sources of information that are available to help us understand culture and climate. The first being our attendance data from last year, the 23-24 academic year, and student climate surveys from spring 2024. These 2 are part of the mission measures data sources. For the student climate survey, this is administered for students in grades 3 through 12. It's a validated measure for measuring culture and climate, and we focus on one particular item tonight within that set of items in that survey. The other 2 data sources are part of the strategic initiative measures, and this includes suspension data from the 23-24 academic year, and we do break that down to look at both in-school and out-of-school suspension. And then lastly, the tiered fidelity inventory, TFI data, which is a self-reported tool that uses a series of indicators to construct a score related to culture and climate. So I always like to preface digging into the data with the framing of what can these data tell us and what are their limitations. And so I think when thinking about culture and climate, these data offer us a really helpful tool for a temperature check about taken together what is happening in our schools and what is the overall climate. They can also be a really important tool for understanding potential disproportionate impact and to identify and shed light on inequities that exist within our schools and how different student groups are affected by the culture and climate conditions. And thirdly, they're an important tool for identifying areas for growth, and we can understand sort of both the strengths and weaknesses and think strategically about how to address them. As for our data limitations, it's important to note, I think when looking at data, one really important caveat is that correlation is different than causation. And so there could be a correlation between certain variables, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that is causing it. And so I like to put that caveat on the data. Secondly, just being mindful that there is sort of limited scope. This is not a comprehensive set of data points that can help us understand culture and climate. And so we have to be aware of the limitations of the data we have available. These are all lagging metrics. We're looking back at 23-24. And so we don't yet have sort of data that is ready from this year to look at, so we're looking backwards. And then the other piece that's important to note is just that there's been a lot of variation in how some of these metrics, particularly suspension, have been tracked, and so this limits our ability to look over time, and the same goes for attendance codes. The good news looking forward is that for attendance in particular, we have for the 24-25 year introduced unified attendance codes for the entire district, and this will, I think, dramatically improve our ability to understand patterns of attendance district-wide. Okay, so I'm going to break these down by data source. So we will be specifically focusing on chronic absenteeism. And so just to note who is included in this sample. So, chronic absenteeism can be measured in a number of different ways. And depending on who you include in the sample, it might slightly change the rates that are being reported. So for the purpose of tonight, we are following the state definition for reporting on chronic absenteeism, which would be any student who is enrolled for 10 or more days at any point in time during the 23-24 year. And when we use the term chronically absent, this is a measure of how many days a student has missed throughout the school year, and missing 10% of school days is considered chronically absent. And then, of course, also just to note the difference. So we are really focusing specifically on chronic absenteeism and not truancy. And so from a data perspective, the key difference is that truancy is based on unexcused absences only, versus chronic absenteeism includes all kinds of absences, including excused, unexcused, and suspensions. And to put Portland's data in context, to note that the overall chronic absenteeism rate for public schools in Maine during the 23-24 year is just about 27%. And when we disaggregate that at the sort of different group levels, we'll see notably for elementary is at 24% and secondary is almost 35%. And so I'll provide those numbers again as sort of context as we look at our own rates. So here, this graph just shows and positions our chronic absenteeism rate relative to the state average. And so we can see that Portland is already below the state chronic absentee rate. But you can see that there's also still a ways to go to hit that 15% target over the next 5 years. When we break apart our data by elementary, middle, and high school, we can see that both our elementary and middle schools are below the state average, but our high schools are above. Again, all three areas are still have some progress to be made to meet that 15% target. So in the next 3 slides, we show a breakout by individual school. In this case, we have not included the names of the schools, and the purpose of these slides is really just to illustrate the variation across schools. So we can see that in this graph, for our elementary schools, 4 schools have already met the 15% or less target. And sort of to put this in context, the state average for elementary schools is 24%. And so all but one of our elementary schools are already below the state average. But there is a 16 percentage point difference between the lowest and highest rates of chronic absenteeism in the elementary schools. When we look at the middle schools, all 3 middle schools are below the secondary state average, and there's an 8 percentage point difference between the lowest and highest rates. And then for high school, we have one of our high schools is below the state secondary average, and this we see a 20 percentage point difference between the lowest and highest rates of chronic absenteeism. So just to summarize, without going through all of the disaggregated subgroups, some highlights when we do dig deeper into the data to look at different groups of students. For economically disadvantaged students, they are more likely to be chronically absent, and there's a 13.5 percentage point difference between economically disadvantaged students and non-economically disadvantaged peers. For students with IEPs, they are also more likely to be chronically absent, with a 12 percentage point difference between that of their non-IEP peers. McKinney-Vento eligible students are also more likely to be chronically absent, with an 11 percentage point difference between non-McKinney-Vento students. Black or African American students and white students had the lowest rates of chronic absenteeism when we disaggregate by race ethnicity, but Hispanic Latino students had the highest chronic absenteeism rate at 45, almost 46%, which is more than twice the rates of the lowest groups. So sort of taken together, when we think about sort of the overall strengths and opportunities that are revealed as we look at these data, it's noteworthy that overall Portland Public Schools is below the state average for chronic absenteeism, and that all but one of our elementary schools are below the state chronic absenteeism rate. All 3 middle schools and 1 high school are below the state secondary schools chronic absenteeism rate. Half of our elementary schools are below the 5-year target for the of 15% for chronic absenteeism, and that there's not a substantial disparity in chronic absenteeism between students who identify as Black and our students who identify as white. So there certainly are some bright spots. When we think about the opportunities, particularly as we look at the subgroup disaggregations, when we think about economically disadvantaged students, students with IEPs, McKinney-Vento students, they do have substantially higher rates of chronic absenteeism as compared to their peers. There is disproportionality in the chronic absenteeism rates of students who identify as Hispanic or Latino. And other piece to note is our chronic absenteeism rates sharply increase between elementary and middle schools, and then from middle to high school levels. So our second data source, we'll look here at suspensions. So before we start looking at the data itself, I just wanted to provide some definitions for clarity, since it's a little, it can get a little tricky when you start getting into the difference between incidents versus unique students. So when we think of resolutions for our data tracking purposes, there are 2 types of resolutions, which would be an out-of-school suspension or an in-school suspension. And so we abbreviate those to OSS and ISS respectively. An incident refers to an event that has occurred resulting in a suspension. So a single event can involve multiple students. So just thinking about that, there could be one event, but multiple students who would then have a suspension in their records. And then a unique student suspended is equal to the number of students who received 1 or more suspensions during the year. So those are just some terms that I'll try to make sure I point out as we look at the data in different ways. So when we look at the overall count of incidents, the breakdown, we have 527 total suspensions assigned during the 23-24 academic year. And it's on almost even split with, slightly more out-of-school suspensions. 53% of suspensions were out-of-school suspensions as compared to 47% of suspensions being in-school suspensions, but a total of 527 incidents. When we look at the incident counts by school band, so this graph has a few pieces of information. So first, you'll see sort of the light blue is the total incidence for out-of-school suspensions. The dark blue is total incidence resulting in in-school suspensions. And then the red bar is the total incidence resulting in a suspension of any kind. So don't try to add these because it could be double counted. But so what we see here is that, when comparing elementary and high school to middle school, we have a greater number of total incidents resulting in suspension at the middle school. And what this translates to when you look at sort of the number of students who are impacted, it turns to less than 1% of elementary students had 1 or more suspension, 10% of middle school students and 5% of high school students were suspended at least once during the 23-24 year. And just to put this in context, this is not out of line with national trends. Data from, it's a little bit older, but from the 2017-18 year nationally found that nearly 1 in 14 secondary students 7% were suspended. And that's 3 times the rate of elementary students, which were 2%. So it's not necessarily out of sync with national trends. So when we look at the suspension type by school, again, we've removed the names of individual schools to show variation. You'll see here for elementary, we only have 3 schools represented. School 1, 2, 3 does not correspond to the schools 1, 2, 3 on the attendance slides, but we only had 3 elementary schools that had any suspensions assigned at all. So among the 3 schools that had them, the majority of incidents were out of school suspensions. For middle school, we see there's more variation across the 3 schools in terms of which type of suspension is being assigned, where school 1 and 3 have a much lower rate of out of school suspensions as compared to school 2. When we look across the 3 schools, schools 1 and 2 have more similar sort of total counts, but school 3 is not too far off. For high school, again, we see some variation here in terms of the types of suspensions assigned, with school 1 actually having 0 in-school suspensions assigned and school 2 having a substantially higher rate of incidence in their school. So when we look at the data to understand what is the event that is triggering the assignment of the suspensions, I pulled the most common reasons that are listed. There are additional reasons beyond this list, but this is sort of the most frequently used incident types. And so for both out of school and in school suspension, fighting is the most common reason provided for assigning a suspension. And many of these have a safety concern that is attached to them. What is perhaps surprising to see on here is that skipping classes is a commonly cited reason for assigning a suspension. And so to dig a little bit deeper to understand the frequency with which students are being assigned a suspension. So this is where the distinction between incidents and unique students is important. So when we look at the total number of unique students suspended during the 23-24 year by suspension type, we can see that this distribution shows for each individual student whether they had 1, 2, or 3 or more suspensions by suspension type. And so most students only are receiving 1 suspension, but there are a number of students who fall into the category of 2 or 3 or more, which does indicate that there are students who are being suspended multiple times. And so when we dig into the subgroup data for suspension data, it's important to think about these suspension rates sort of relative to the enrollment rates for different subgroups to understand, is this sort of reflective of what would be expected based on the proportion of students represented in the overall enrollment. So when we look at economically disadvantaged students, they make up 50% of students in the district, yet 75% of While male students make up 52% of the district enrollment, they account for 69% of the total suspensions. And then when we look at race ethnicity breakdowns, we see Black or African American students have 31% of the enrollment, but 37% of the suspensions. Hispanic Latino students are 11% of enrollment, but 15% of suspensions. Two or more races students are 6% of enrollment, but 9% of suspensions. And white students are 47% of enrollment and 34% of suspensions. And so I'll just caveat this by saying that we did not necessarily check the statistical significance. It's just worth noting that there is some variation between the enrollment rate and the suspension rate. So in summary, thinking about the strengths and opportunities from these data, when we look at the overall suspension data, it is important to note that suspension is used very rarely at the elementary level and only for instances where there's a serious safety concern, while more comprehensive plans are being created. And when we look at suspension assignments over time, breaking it down by month, we do see that there's a gradual decrease in suspension incidents over time over the course of the 23-24 year. And lastly, 2 of 3 middle schools are using in-school suspension more often than they are using out-of-school suspension. But there are some opportunities, and same with attendance. But I think as we look at certain subgroups for students with IEPs, students from certain racial or gender identities, that they do tend to be represented at a higher rate in the suspension data. And there are cases of suspensions being used as a disciplinary response outside of safety concerns in the middle and high school levels. Okay, so on to our third data source, and I am trying to go fast. I can tell Ryan wants me to move along. So our student climate survey responses, we are specifically using one particular item from the elementary and secondary surveys, and they're very similar. So at the elementary level, the item on the survey is there is an adult at school who will help me if I need help. And for the secondary level is I know an adult at school that I can talk with if I need help. And so there are a number of other items that these surveys can provide, but this particular metric is a proxy for culture and climate. And so when we look at the scores, so this number that we share, the overall average on the rating of these items is 3.29, which doesn't necessarily mean a lot absent the scale. So the way that students are asked this particular item, they're given a 1 to 4 scale where 1 is equal to never, 4 is equal to always. And so the score that we are able to report is the average rating across students on that particular item. So to try to kind of interpret it, that's not a number. A score of above 3, right, would indicate often or always. So that would be considered sort of a positive response, and a score below 3 is considered sort of a negative response. So that just to give some context about what a 3.29 would mean, and we're aiming toward an overall district average of 3.57. So when we look at our responses across elementary schools, and again, this is really intended to demonstrate variation across the elementary schools, we see that 7 elementary schools have not yet met the target, although many of them are approaching it. At the middle school level, we can see that none of the middle schools have yet met our target. And at the high school level, no school has yet met the target. So as a survey item, this again provides a small window into understanding what's happening in schools, but it does offer the students' perspective on their experiences. Thinking about the strengths here, most elementary schools have met or are close to meeting that 5-year target of 3.57, and all schools in the district are at or above that 3.0 benchmark, which is certainly something to celebrate. When we think about opportunities, noticing that scores do drop between the elementary and secondary levels as an area for growth. And then last, our fourth and final data source is the culturally responsive tiered fidelity inventory, the TFI. And so, like the survey item, right? It's in the abstract might be a little hard to wrap your head around. But when we think about the score that we report on for TFI, this is made up of a lot of different indicators that help us understand what's happening. So the score is sort of simplistic. But there's a lot of other characteristics of that PBIS practices that are being sort of captured in that score. So when we think about the actual scores that are assigned, so a threshold of 70% is sort of considered high fidelity, which would mean that schools are adhering to, many of the best practices for PBIS systems. And so the way we would interpret this then is that 7 out of 9 elementary schools have sort of high fidelity on this index. 2 of 3 middle schools have high fidelity at or above 70%, and 1 of 3 high schools have high fidelity at or above 70%. And so when we think about if 70% is our benchmark that we're aiming, the majority of our elementary and middle schools are already at or above that benchmark. But the opportunity we have is that we have 5 schools that have not yet met that benchmark, including 2 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 2 high schools. And with that, I'll hand it over to Joanna Frankel. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Joanna Frankel, Director of Elementary Culture and Climate. Haley, thank you. That was so much information. So can you just advance the slide? So that was a ton of data for you to take in, and I'm sure you're thinking, okay, what are we doing with this? That's the important part. So I'm just going to give a brief summary, and then Dr. Reiger and I will talk more specifically about the elementary and secondary levels. So we have 4 main strategies that are district-wide that we're utilizing this year to improve our culture and climate in all of our schools to create safer and more supportive learning environments. So the first is the utilization of our culture and climate coordinators in our buildings. So first, I just want to say thank you for creating a budget that has those positions in it. They are key drivers of this work in the buildings, and we have them in almost all of our schools, and they are really crucial positions to lead teams, PBIS teams, student support teams, attendance teams, to support practices that happen throughout schools, including the structures of advisory and crew at the secondary level, morning meeting at the elementary level, and their ability to deliver professional development to staff and coach staff on best practices. The second is around strengthening our implementation of PBIS across the tiers. So we just talked about the tiered fidelity inventory and measuring implementation of PBIS at the tier 1 level. But positive behavior interventions and supports is a multi-tiered system. So we talk about what happens at tier 1 for all students, and then increasing levels of support for students who need more individualized intervention and instruction. And just a note there's a lot to say, but we do have 6 schools this year that are participating in the state's PBIS Advanced Tiers cohort, which is through the Maine Department of Education, and it's a 2-year cohort. So we have 3 elementary schools and all 3 of our middle schools in that cohort. And then we also have a high school that is participating in the Tier 1 cohort, which is a 3-year commitment. Work around improving attendance and belonging across schools. And so some of our strategies include ongoing professional development, partnership with the organization Count Me In, which is a Maine-based attendance organization. A lot of what they do is tied in with Attendance Works, which is a national organization. The use of teaming structures, so figuring out getting the right people in the right room with the right data to really make plans to act on that chronic absenteeism data that you saw earlier. And also creating their school-specific attendance plans, so using their particular data to make plans. And then just a note, transportation is such a crucial piece of this. And shout out to our incredible transportation department and just ongoing work to ensure that we have uninterrupted transportation, especially for our students who are more mobile. And then the last strategy is enhancing our social emotional learning, or SEL instruction. So that includes, there was the earlier slide that talked about base and second step for Tier 1 curriculum, and then also utilizing restorative practices and really explicit teaching of skills. Great, thank you. So, I'm just going to share a couple key actions at the elementary school level because that's my purview. So the first is around specific elementary actions to reduce chronic absenteeism. So the first is that all of our schools have school-specific attendance targets. So we've seen the overall, right, we want to get to 15% chronic absenteeism over 5 years. You also saw the slides that show that some of our elementary schools have already met or exceeded that target. It doesn't mean we're not going to work on chronic absenteeism. So all of our elementary schools have their sort of local context goals and associated action steps. The second I mentioned is around that partnership with Count Me In, which includes monthly attendance collaborative meetings that our culture and climate coordinators are attending. And then the last is professional development for all staff across our elementary schools on strategies for increasing attendance and belonging. And I'll just share a quick anecdote from one school. There's a photo at the end of some attendance booklets that Reiki School is using. They're really choosing to target their K-2 students based on what their 23-24 data showed them. And so having really positive experiences and celebrations for students around their attendance, and at the same time also trying to remove those barriers that keep kids from attending. And what they have discovered is there's a real link with students, their elementary school students who have older siblings, and those older siblings are sometimes called in to take care of the younger siblings, which impacts everybody's attendance, right? And so they're really working in partnership, especially with King Middle, around those relationships. Okay. And then specific actions at the elementary level to reduce suspension, which you saw is impacting less than 1% of our elementary school students, but still an area we are committed to working on. So the first action is around continued staff training on what's called CSTAG, which is the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, which are evidence-based practices around teaming to dig into a threat and determine if it's transient or if it's substantive, and then appropriate actions to take depending on the severity of the threat. And part of the purpose of that program is to decrease suspensions, to really delve into what is just a transient threat and might need to be dealt with in other ways. The second is increased training on restorative practices, which I know you've heard a lot about. And then the third is increased training for staff on assessing the function of student behavior, and then coordinated individualized behavior support plans that get at the function of that behavior. Because what we see in suspension at the elementary school level is we're really talking about safety issues. It's not being used as a punitive measure. It's really when a student is exhibiting unsafe behaviors, and we need to have some time to make a plan for them and peers and staff to be safe. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chris Reiger.
Hi, good evening. So secondary actions to reduce chronic absenteeism. So you see partnership with Count Me In, as Joanna mentioned, where middle schools and high schools are also involved in that. Extended advisory, at least once a week in all secondary schools, and that's for community building and opportunities to facilitate SEL lessons using BASE or our SEL program. And why advisory? When we're talking about chronic absenteeism, if we can't get students to think about what we're talking about, we need to make space to talk about what students are thinking about. What's going on for them interpersonally, interpersonally, their hoped for futures, how to navigate challenges, et cetera. Research suggests that middle and high schools with strong advisory culture can positively impact student attendance. Robust advisory programs promote relationships between students and teachers, foster a sense of belonging, and provide support for academic and social emotional needs, all of which contribute to improved attendance rates. And then lastly, bolster the work of our building attendance teams so that they're fluent in database decision-making and approaching the work with support and intervention at all levels. And I want to highlight the work of Portland High. I was at their attendance team 2 weeks ago, and they were covering all three tiers in a midday meeting, which was great. So they were working on fostering a positive school climate by, intentionally kind of recruiting for their school culture team called their Compass team. They were developing plans for providing education for students and families on the importance of attendance. So PHS has a campaign of Bulldogs Show Up. Some of the signage there is in that photograph. They were identifying students at risk of chronic absenteeism through weekly data tracking, and they were offering kind of small group targeted interventions. So they, including every other secondary school, was making phone calls home to families of students who had missed 3 or more days a couple weeks ago. And then finally, they were providing personal case management for students and creating kind of individualized plans, which included some home visits, which their culture coordinators had done earlier that day. And actions to reduce suspension, increase training on restorative practices in partnership with public health and youth-led justice. Additionally, in the spring, we had 6 educators certified in providing the International Institute of Restorative Practices for Educators training. So we're building our in-house capacity as well. Middle school course offerings in conflict resolution, social emotional learning, and digital citizenship and well-being. Digital citizenship and suspension. We're particularly proud of that series of lessons, which include how digital media impacts digital media impacts adolescents' brains, and how they can construct positive digital habits related to one's values. If you talk to our administrators about the incidents that result in suspension, they are commonly started online or fueled by online activity, and so that's kind of why that's up there as well. Professional development in a lot of areas, including effective student support teams and lowercase FBAs, so assessing the function of behavior and writing robust individualized behavior support plans, and decision-making, database decision-making. And to that point, middle school principals met last night in part to review and practice using a data-informed decision-making protocol. And that's something that they'll be using when they conduct something we call the October Catch, which is a screening process that involves identifying students who have 2 or more referrals to the office by the end of October to match them with targeted supports or interventions. And we do this because research tells us that the number of office referral students received by the end of October is a good predictor of the number of referrals they're likely to receive by the end of the year. And in fact, research shows that 50% of students who have 6 or more office referrals have 2 by the end of October. So we know who they are and we can intervene now, or in a month. And then we have, as Joanna shared, full middle school participation in the advanced tiers cohort. I'm really excited about that. That means they're going to be expanding their evidence-based kind of tier 2 intervention, which is at most schools, tier 2 interventions is usually a desert. And so we're going to add in, check out this year, which is great, evidence-based. Super excited about that. And pilot the use of a social emotional behavior screener, which we are not currently using at the secondary level. And then one high school, Deering, is participating in the Maine's tier 1 cohort for high schools, as Joanna mentioned as well. So a lot of exciting stuff to kind of change those numbers from last year, this year. I'll turn it back over to Ryan. I think there's one more slide with a photo. Just want to give a shout out to Reiki, as Joanna mentioned there in that photo of their attendance booklet, and those are last week's middle and high school culture and climate coordinator meeting. So thank you.
Deep breath. That was amazing just in terms of the analysis, but also it's just representative of the amount of work that the team has done, because, you know, Chris, Dr. Reiger, Chris talked about the fact that if you intervene early, you can make sure that students stay on track. This team has been working very hard to make sure that the school year starts off strong, that our climate and culture teams start off strong, so that students are on track, present, and in class. And so just credit to this team and to all of our schools for the work, for the new positions and the work that they are doing around this. Board Chair, with that, we are happy to turn it over for any questions.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes, Vice Chair Bondo, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Tim, for the presentation. And I will have some more follow-up questions because I will go a little more deeper later on, but I have a couple questions here. I remember during COVID, the Hispanic Latino student, they were above 48 or 49, if I remember that time. And now today, when I see the data, they are 45. What are we building around strategies to try to make sure? Because I remember that time we have some positive strategies, and I remember they had some convenient, I think, around Portland High School on the Superintendent Botana, bringing families to make sure they have that conversation. I think Dr. Ahmed can talk about it, what we have done since to try to reduce, because I see we still above 40s. So that means it's not a lot. Have you done a lot after that, or what's going on with the population still higher on the chronic absentees? Did I make myself understood? Or?
So you are making reference to the task force of
the Latino, Hispanic Latino, the number is still high. And we have the number high since COVID. I remember we were above 48, 49 around COVID, but we had some strategy around it. So I just to understand, did we lose it, or are we continue, or what really going on that we have that still high number on the population?
I think some of the strategies, and I cannot recall it exactly what the numbers of these strategies, but what Portland High School and Dr. Reiger actually mentioned about this briefly are doing, it is like all hands on the deck. They are making calls, they're visiting homes, they're doing a lot of strategies to combat this. So but something to look for is like what these interventions and what they're doing now is what will be the change. And when we compare to 23-24 data to what we will get soon, or the data or the step backs that we will have, and then we will compare data. But there are many interventions that as Dr. Riker said, Portland High School team were really engaging. And
So, I mean, if I look at the number now, so I didn't see a lot of impact, right, with those interventions?
the numbers of 23, 24,
Yes.
is that
Compare what we had during COVID, because we still, during COVID, what, 48, 49, and today is 45. And in between, you mentioned about intervention, something really happened. So I just don't see any huge impact moving the number down, bringing the number down. I'm sorry.
so? I don't know if I understand the you're making reference to during the COVID and after the COVID 23, 24 numbers. That's where you want to compare. Is that what I'm asking? Or what you're asking?
Vice Chair Bondo, I mean, I can't speak to the strategies that were put in place for during COVID and then after, right? What we can do is look at what strategies that were put in place that are still in place, but the fact that the current chronic absenteeism for our Latinx population is still 45.55% tells us that the impact is not having it at the scale that we want, right? Which is why the strategies that we're talking about today are getting at the very specific student level, and why we're talking about specific student outreach phone calls and tracking at the individual level. I don't know if that was part of the strategy or not. I wasn't here, but I hear you on the question of making sure that we're not repeating the same strategies. We'll look at that to make sure we're not repeating the same strategies.
I can just be specific that what we did was a series of listening sessions with the Latinx community where I think we had some fairly good participation, and out of that became an effort to provide more access to paths for our Latinx students. And I don't know if that has occurred, but that was a key strategy. I think that was like a key strategy that came out of those conversations with the Latinx families and students.
And I would just add that was something that I followed pretty closely as well, because one of the issues was that students were having to take care of siblings and have jobs to bring income into the family, right? And so whatever the strategies were put in place, they weren't operationalized. Like, and I think that, we've talked about that as a board a lot, that when we implement things, they have to be operationalized or they go away. And if we're not measuring ourselves against what we're doing, they go away. So I think I would guess, I don't have the evidence, but I would guess that this is an example of that. And I'm hoping that now that we have this regular data output and that we're able to disaggregate it, that we can start to hold ourselves accountable to the strategies that we're putting in place, and we'll see that movement. But I think you're right to ask that question, because this isn't new. This data is not new where it is.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you.
And, and the work that the attendance teams are doing and the investment that's made with the climate and culture coordinators is something really positive, impacting, but we will wait for the data.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Then I have a follow-up.
Did you have another question?
Yes, I just have two little ones. So I saw the duration for the suspension. The maximum is 10 days out of school suspension. Am I right? So I just wonder what kind of reentry do we have? Because if we have some student going over the 10 days suspension out of school, so that means what are we doing to have a makeup for the missing classes? Or that one is still under the strategy? I just want to make sure.
Yeah. So, and there is a truth that there is actually a couple of cases. And I'm not sure why it doesn't show up here. There's a couple of cases of where the suspension is longer, that has to do with extreme cases that involve legal, that is something different than that. But there is a reentry plan and engagement with the school that takes place to make sure that students are able to make up their work, are able to have that opportunity. And so that does exist, because the thing we want to make sure of with suspensions, right? One is we want to make sure they're used as infrequently as possible because we know that it has a negative impact. That negative impact only gets multiplied when a student comes back and is academically behind because they've missed class. And so we can follow up just to make sure that we're doing that with our climate and culture coordinators, but that there is an expectation that students have access to their work, that they're able to get caught up within that, and that for students who are doing a longer suspension, that there is a re-engagement plan. The vast majority of students, though, their suspension is significantly shorter, right? The mode is 1, that is the typical.
Oh, okay. All right. So my last one is on the, to improve attendance and the chronic absentees. We created some best practices. I just wonder how much are we involving parents to the best practices? I know that we've been calling families, we've been, try to reach out, but how much are we bringing them to the best practices? I just wonder. Or are we thinking about it, or we just focus to the students and the school climate, but no from home, no from, because we heard we have the sibling relation, right? Then older sibling has to take over the little one, so everything comes for the household. So are we engaging parents as well to those best practice to improve the attendance or not?
Yeah, so I'll ask Joanna and Chris just to come up and talk about that, but it is about a connection with home, right? So there is a piece, especially as students get older, about making sure that there's a sense of belonging and a desire to be at school, right? And there is a real importance to make sure that there's a connection with home and that we're making sure that there's any barrier to getting to school, that we're removing it, right? And part of that is about the work with the family, right? So Joanna talked about that idea of making sure that with transportation, for example, that we're making sure that our most mobile students have access to schools, so that transportation isn't an issue. But I'm going to ask Joanna and Chris just to speak to how the schools are making that connection with families as explicit as possible.
Yeah, I think that you said most of what I was going to say, which is that at the elementary level, we have to involve families. We have to. And the important thing is to think about the barriers and to take shame out of the picture. Exactly. That just can't happen. And so the elementary schools are all thinking about what are events we already have on our calendars and times when we already have families in our buildings, when we can use that opportunity to talk about the importance of attendance and really talk about, to let families know, we want your children here. We want them to want to be here. It's really important. And that those absences really add up. It might just be 3 a month and feel like 3 a month, but that's a lot of lost instructional time. And so, so much of the work is around working directly with families to remove the barriers, whether it's we're going to buy you an alarm, we're going to buy your child an alarm clock because we know you have to be out the door to work before they get up and they've got to catch the bus.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Is there anything that you wanted to add?
If we're taking a tiered approach to responding to attendance, so the kids that require something more, something different, that have kind of passed some thresholds to activate us, then it's upon the attendance team to figure out, is this a matter of can't come, won't come, or don't see the value? And then if it's, can't come or won't come, we absolutely need the family support. Certainly I don't see the value in showing up either. But, the family has to be a part of the solution, regardless of kind of what the factor is preventing a student from getting to school. And just last year, we did have an alternative suspension work group that met, and we developed an enhanced in-school suspension protocol that when we piloted it last spring, schools said, we found this really valuable. Most of our students that get an in-school suspension don't come back. And so they were like, maybe we should save this for, the students that do come back because it's quite labor intensive to disrupt a student's trajectory. Although we have them ideally in school all day. So we have them, they're a captive audience for us to do good work with them to figure out what the barriers are so we can get over them. But the take-home message is that administrators said that enhanced in-school suspension protocol might actually be a better fit for kids that have missed a lot of school, and it would be a re-entry step because it really is a full assessment of how they're doing, what their strengths are, what their hoped for future is, and then reducing the barriers. So that's also a strategy that we haven't really kind of tried on, but that is ready to go for students that are demonstrating like a big break in school and are having that a hard time kind of plugging back in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Victor and then Board Member Opperman.
Thank you, Chair. I first want to say I think this is among the most important work that we do, and so I just want to thank the team. And I thank you for the presentation today. I'm going to focus on the suspension data. And first, I am disappointed not to see trend data over time. I know definitions have changed, but I also am familiar with this data over time and know that we do have data that we could look at to at least look at some high-level trends. And so I'm disappointed that that isn't here, and I would like to see that. And I would like to see it in a way that I can make sense of it, because as Haley said, it gets complicated when you look at incidents versus students. And the superintendent sent me some data earlier this year, and it was just personally, without more context, it was hard for me to make sense of it. I'm going to read from just a short paragraph from the enhanced in-school suspension work that was done last year, and it says, the research is clear, out-of-school suspension does not work to reduce the likelihood a student will re-engage in problematic behavior. So let's just be clear, out-of-school suspension does not work. Receiving even one suspension is associated with a higher likelihood of academic failure, school dropout, and involvement in the juvenile justice system. So I sit here, really disappointed in how many students we are suspending, both in school and out of school. And I think that it is something that this board must take on. I think that when you look at page 42 of what was in board docs, and it talks about the reasons, the most common out-of-school suspension incident types and the most common in-school suspension incident types. And you see fighting, skipping classes, insubordination, minor incident/disruption. These do not meet even what's in our board policy, and I think our board policy needs to be tighter. But the board policy says for, just to focus on out-of-school suspension for a second, says should only be used when unavoidable as a safety measure, such as in the case of an imminent likelihood of harm. And yet we are suspending kids, including out-of-school suspensions, for skipping classes. I do not think that this can continue. So I would like to suggest to the board that this is something that we need to, a policy that we need to take on immediately and work to strengthen, to provide more guidance, and specifically to really limit what in what cases we can suspend students, both in school and out of school. And I think actually our elementary school policy, which resulted from a state law a few years ago, is a good model. And it's in the policy referred to in these slides, but it says that out-of-school suspensions for students in grade 5 and below may only be imposed when there's a firearms violation or when the principal determines there's an imminent danger of serious physical injury to the student or others, and less restrictive interventions would be ineffective. So I think something like that should apply to all of our students, and that we also should include a list of incident types that cannot qualify as a reason to suspend a student.
Board Member Victor, do you have a question right now?
So my question is, I'd be interested in hearing your reaction, both Dr. Reiger and Joanna, to really taking, and I guess mostly to Dr. Reiger, because the elementary suspensions are, I mean, it's a little bit hard to interpret it, but they're fairly low. So Dr. Reiger, I'd be interested in your response, and thank you, Chair, for refocusing me.
I'm happy to jump in and answer the question just on that. So your question specifically is about the appropriateness of the elementary suspensions?
No.
Can you ask the question again then?
My question, and I would actually like Dr. Reiger's response. My question is to, your, I've made the case that we are suspending far too many students, both in school and out of school, and that we, as a board, really need to tighten up substantially the cases in which our district, our schools can suspend kids. And I'm interested in your response to that.
Yes, please. I think this is, it breaks the hearts, and I met with our middle school principals and assistant principals last night, and I discussed this. And they're heartbroken when they do this, and they will say it's a safety measure in terms of something happened and the community is impacted. And while the imminent danger might have subsided because the event was neutralized, figured out, kids were separated, whatever, the impacts are remaining, and there needs to be a time to kind of to have a circle with students away from the student that maybe have participated in that, how to bring them back. It's very labor intensive to do this well. And so I think all of our principals would say we welcome the help, because we doesn't feel good to suspend anyone. And we know that in school is a better alternative than out of school, but none of them are good. It's taking kids out of learning, and the sentence that you wrote or you read, I wrote. I mean, I feel that way. And our principals feel that way. So we would love more support. And I do think that looking at this data as regularly as we anticipate doing it this year, that assessment will be a powerful intervention for us, for principals to bring the data back to teachers every month to say, this is where we're at. That will have an impact, and we need to kind of get into those data routines. But certainly I'm sure I could speak for all of them, say we'd welcome more conversations so that we can help the board understand kind of the problems which we're facing.
And just to follow up, do you think a more restrictive policy could help bring about a reduction or a closer examination of?
Yes.
I mean, skipping classes and then suspending a kid. I mean, it's just there's no way to make sense of that.
Agreed.
But there are lots of other things, like kids fight, right? And yet a lot of those fights can just get broken up and
they are
great action.
Yes. But yes, I do think we should look at kind of what justifies that decision to make a suspension, and kids that are not going to class, a consequence of not going to school is not a logical solution.
I think one thing and I think we all agree, right, as Dr. Reiger said at the beginning, is that nobody wants to suspend a student, period, end of sentence. Nobody wants to suspend a student. Nobody gets into education and says, at the end of the day, I want to suspend a student. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that this data communicates that anybody here wants to suspend a student. I don't. I've had conversations with our leaders. I don't think that's the case. One of the things that when we dug into the data, and we also looked at the incident descriptions, is that one of the challenges that we have is around the reporting of data and the accuracy of the reporting of the data. And so one of the issues that we have here is around what a code means in one school versus another. And so take something where we may think of it as black and white in terms of what something means, like insubordination. What one school is coding as insubordination, or what one school is coding as a fight. Another school may code as a minor incident or a disruption. And so part of what we have here and what Haley talked about is about making sure that we're being consistent across our schools. And so part of this is that one of the things that we want to do before we just jump to making a blanket statement about what the problem is that we're trying to solve is to make sure that we truly understand what the challenge is within the schools. And so the first part of that is to make sure that we're consistently looking at and understanding our data. And that really started with a conversation last night where we put in front of our school leaders their data. And we said, let's look at this. And does this represent the schools that we believe we run? And I think it's fair to say that that was one of the first times we truly had that honest conversation to say, does this represent our school? And for the school leader at school number 2 at that middle school to say, does this look like the number of out-of-school suspensions that you have? And for them to have that reflection and to say, no, it doesn't represent the school that I want to lead, and to say change is necessary. And change sometimes is necessary through a change in policy. Change is also necessary sometimes through a change in mindset and awareness and reflection. And so that's where I want to make sure we're careful. Because I think here we have to make sure that before we leap to say that the answer is about changing a policy, is that we make sure that we understand what the problem is. And I think in this case, we're at the starting end of that piece when it comes to looking at the data and having those conversations. Because I would guess that just by having that conversation that Dr. Reiger and Dr. Ahmed led with our middle school principals yesterday, that we will see a change in how leaders act and how they respond to actions that will be faster than other actions that we could take, and that will avoid unintentional consequences from perhaps doing something like changing a policy where it may not match up with what's the actual on the ground piece. And so that's why I just want to make sure that before we jump to that we're really understanding what's going on in the school.
If I can just say, with all due respect, we had the same. We last revised and tightened our suspension policy in 2001, and Mickey will remember that, and perhaps others on the board will remember that we had the same conversation at that time about the incident categorizations and about the lack of uniformity across the schools. And I think there's only so long that we can let the data and categorizing incidents stand in the way of kids being in school and getting the grade level instruction that they deserve.
And what I would wonder is when we went through this, what I'm wondering is whether or not we can follow the actions that we're doing here and let them play out and see if it results in a different outcome than the last time.
And I hear that, and I think that it sounds like the data you presented, the conversation last night sounds more valuable than perhaps a policy change, because you're having a lot of reflection that hopefully will drive culture change, and culture change is often harder to make than our passing a policy. But I do think, and I don't think that our current policy is actually being implemented, because many of these types of incidents do not meet our current policy. So I think strengthening a policy so that it's continues to not be met, and even more so, isn't a solution in my mind. I do want to just really draw attention to, like, it's not okay how many students that we are suspending, and the reasons we're suspending students. We should be suspending students only in the case that they're really an imminent, that they pose an imminent harm. I know it gets complex. I absolutely hear what Dr. Iger is saying in terms of the time and intensity of effort that's needed. And I know I'm not in school, so I don't see all of the all of the layers and complexity. But this, this list of reasons why we're suspending students is just incredibly alarming to me. And in my mind, just not acceptable.
Board Member Victor, I think, I would welcome you to work with other board members to bring a resolution, to talk to Board Member Biliou on the Policy and Curriculum Committee to be able to move something forward. I just think that, like, right now in this moment, we're not going to make a decision about what is the next step. So I understand your perspective, and I welcome you to follow procedure to move it forward.
Sure. We're talking about the presentation, and I'm done with my questions. Thank you.
Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I appreciate the data very, very much. And I appreciate the efforts to explain the data. And I think even more than just suspensions, I think absenteeism as a whole is a big problem. And you brought up, Mickey, you brought up the point about the Latino group still being in that situation. And I'm wondering, is there any specific emphasis being placed on that community in particularly the middle school and the high school? Is there because there is a language difference. I don't know if those kids are involved in multilingual, and to make it happen. And because for some reason, I think make it happen is probably a very positive reason to be coming back to school. And my question is, has anything been done to emphasize the action to bring those kids, it's a small group, but to see that happens? Are we focusing, the question is, are we focusing on Latinx at all?
At this time, what we started with really tier 1, where we immediately, like first a couple of weeks, we started off school, we started looking into the numbers with the principals, like myself personally sitting down with principals and looking into the attendance data and getting the names with the grade level, and just have the attendance teams having their specific interventions from calling home. There was, if you were absent 3 days, so there was students who took longer summer and came later, and the students who relocated to another places, students, so there's many different reasons. So they were really like at this time, it's kind of like screening for that, and following up with the parents and
I just wondered, because there is a language barrier there, and I wondered with Make It Happen is a multilingual group.
Yes.
And I just wondered if Make It Happen is reaching out to that particular group of kids. It's a lot of kids that have multilingual, that speak many languages, but it seems to me that group has not budged. And so that would be just a question, a suggestion.
Dr. Opperman, if I can jump in on the Make It Happen piece, I spoke with Grace after we talked this morning about Make It Happen, because I was curious about exactly how much they were reaching out to target around chronic absenteeism. Because remember, this is talking about chronic absenteeism, so specifically students there. And we did talk about which students Make It Happen were reaching at the middle and high school level. And for the most part, Make It Happen when it comes to chronic absenteeism is not reaching the students that are experiencing chronic absenteeism. They're reaching the students that are there every day. And so it's a mismatch in terms of strategy. So Make It Happen is reaching students who are present every day that may have language support or academic support or really being successful, but meet that profile, but not on the attendance.
So so what's causal? Do they come because they're in Make It Happen? Or, so it just, that causal.
Yeah, it's just not an intervention strategy for that.
No, but I think, okay. But my point being, I think we need a stronger intervention, particularly at other groups.
Our community and family specialistic team, actually, in the multilingual, they really have strong connections with the communities. So they're reaching out, and the schools are using. So
okay, good. That's my question.
Because
so that when Mickey asks the question again, that it isn't 45%, it's 2%, because there aren't that many kids. I mean, go ahead.
No, I just want to, when Dr. Ahmed just mentioned about the multicultural, how many do we have on the Hispanic Latino to reach to those families? I think we have only one specialist or family specialists on the Latino side. One or two.
We got some more now.
We got some more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be another comment, a question, and it's more in line with attendance and the suspension aspect is the phones and the technology, because as a teacher, having to deal with whether there's a policy or not, having to manage the phones, the technology interferes with the education. And it's frustration, and I think that sometimes brings up the quick jump to get out of my room type situation. Teachers actually don't like to suspend kids, and they don't like kids to be absent because it adds so much more work on the teacher. They're not doing it because they want to make more work for themselves. I mean, because when you do make up that work, you have to do it for suspended kids. You have to prepare the whole thing, which is in a separate way, and do some backup. So I just want to make sure there's an understanding that that there is a mismatch of understanding sometimes as to why kids get suspended. I think it's one of the things that kids misbehave or have issues is they're frustrated with situations and they're ready to blow. And you don't blame it whether it's because of something else, but that the teacher who needs that support to be supported. And are we seeing the teachers that maybe are sending more kids out to out of the classroom for whatever reason? Are those teachers getting more support to help them work through their path of the restoration? Because the restoration piece is two pieces, and teachers model it. And if the teacher is frustrated and frazzled, the students will be frustrated and frazzled. So I think in looking at that, I would ask you to consider that aspect of how to resolve the conflicts that are causing these separations. And I think I had one other thing, but I think I'll let it go.
Thank you. I've got Board Member Bryden, and then did you have a question, Board Member Billiou? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I will reiterate, thank you. So much information. So if I ask a question that you covered and I missed it, I sincerely apologize. There's so much information. So my first question has to do with cross-referencing, and my suspicion is that this is not possible, but I want to test my assumption. I'm curious about whether it's possible to cross-reference the suspension and absenteeism and chronic absenteeism data with responses to the survey of, do you have an adult in the building that you can talk to? And I'm guessing that the survey might be, okay, all right. I thought so. Relatedly, that survey question, do you have an adult in the building you can talk to? I'm curious about whether there is also, or whether there could be, a question about peer supports.
I mean, there could be, but that tool is a valid and reliable tool, and so we use it as that. So we could ask another question about that to get more information, but that would be a different,
Sure. Okay. And then I'm also curious about whether our current data universe captures which students, I'm thinking of the secondary level, captures which students do and do not participate in co-curriculars, and whether there's a correlation there at all in terms of students that do versus do not, and their rates of chronic absenteeism and suspension.
I'm guessing we do not have that data, although super interesting. Yeah. And I know some schools kind of collect information about who's participating. I don't know if they've cross-referenced with, that and compared it to who's attending, not attending, and just getting into some trouble.
Thank you.
So there's an ability within our student information system to flag students based on certain pieces. We do not currently utilize that feature for things like participation in extracurriculars or for things like participation in Make It Happen. That is something that we are thinking about for the future for things like this. It's really a question about what's the right things to do so that we make sure that we're following it through for the 5 years, that type of thing. We have not gotten there.
That it? Beautiful. Board Member Billiou?
What happened to the position of the community coordinator that did the research work to figure out what was happening with the Latinx communities? Is she still here?
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the position you're referring
Okay, because there was research done last year to figure out specifically why Latinx communities or Latinx students weren't coming to school. And we were presented with that.
Was several years ago. So that was before I came on the board. It was in the spring.
Okay.
It's been a while. I know that Betsy was involved with that group and recruiting the families and students to participate, but I'm not sure who the staff member was. I don't remember.
I think it was Betsy. But okay, I think I would be interested in just getting an email to understand more about what is being done to address specifically the chronic absenteeism within the Hispanic community and Latino community. And also, I think I just want to reiterate that, yes, these reasons obviously don't make sense and they are very alarming. But I also think that tightening a policy isn't going to change behavior, it's not going to reconstruct how we're looking at things. And if people are determining or have different translations of different things in different schools, then that's more about the systems and the processes that we're using to determine how we're looking at behavior. And so I would be interested in understanding how we're translating that behavior and how are we making it the same across the school systems. That's what I'm interested in. I don't know about the whole other conversation, but if that's possible, just like what y'all are doing to make sure that students are aligned with their definition of what things are and they understand the policy and are able to translate it into behavior, because we also should be making effort to ensure that people are adhering to policy and understand what that looks like. So,
yeah, and Board Member Billiou, we 100% agree with you on that. We started that work with attendance, to be honest with you, because if we looked at attendance codes have the same challenge in terms of consistency of application. And so we started with that. And so we currently have work going on that was led by Haley to make sure we are clear on the definition and the use. And that first started with understanding what all the codes were, slimming them down so that we had a common set of codes across all schools, providing a common set of definitions, providing training for principals, assistant principals, and then school-based staff that use it, and then monitoring it. And so that was the first bit. And so we're working on that. And then our second is around suspensions. And so we're sort of like moving through it one piece at a time to make sure that we're doing it and doing it effectively.
Thank you. Did you have another question? Okay, thank you. Board Member Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Is there a required process by which, I'm talking about suspensions here, by which the suspension decision is reviewed by the person's supervisor or someone, higher up in the administration? Or do we have like an after action review of what happens?
Dr. Ahmed, do you want to speak through the process and what's required for approval?
Yeah, so when a student or there's infraction takes place and there is a due process with talking to the student, with talking to the witnesses, and whatever happened, and if there is immediate safety reasons, and the administrator decides to remove the student or suspend, often administrators, they text me or depending on the infraction and that time, but weekly I meet with the administrators and they brief me about what happened and if they suspended the students. So,
okay.
But if there is really like a fight or something, they will immediately text me and debrief with me about their thinking. And yeah.
Are there suspensions that occur without the decision maker contacting you?
Yes. But later, let me know after they happen. Because if there is a fight and there is students involved and there's safety reasons and calling home and removing students and sending home and, later letting me know.
I think that, if I can just make a comment, I think that gets close to assuaging my concerns. I mean, I just think this is an area that is kind of least susceptible to analysis by data because, on the chart there's 200 different incidents, and I guarantee you there's 200 different contexts and factors that go into those. So I feel less compelled to kind of amp up the policy language when every incident is going to have a different context. So what matters to me from the outside is, are the adults in the room, having their decisions reviewed to make sure that in each context has a good decision been made? And, I think there probably are some issues with how they're categorized and presented to us, but I just want to have confidence that, there isn't an AP that's gone rogue, and is over suspending, right? I want to make sure that there is oversight and if to the extent possible, review of each decision to make sure that everyone agrees, that we've put in charge that a good decision has been made on these facts.
Yeah, and I want to say that our administrators, like all of us, they really, no one wants, as Dr. Scanlon said, wants to suspend the students.
Yeah.
So I want to just put it out there, and they really have their hearts in the right place. And when we look at the data, they were all like, no, this is not okay. So
I probably shouldn't have said it that way. I guess my point is really that I just want to make sure that there's review of the decisions.
Yes.
That's really simply put.
And I think that we go through the same thing as staff that we do here, right? Which is we look at this data and say, this data points to us a need to reflect on our practice and to make sure that this mirrors what we believe our data should say about us and about the district, right? And so for me, this data highlights the fact that, yes, we have that process in place and that we need to continue to norm and to monitor that is the case.
I go further and say, and like really develop and adhere to a protocol where we debrief these events, decision to suspend or not, but that we're not just saying, a student did X, therefore they get consequence Y, but it's this, student made this choice, adult made this choice in response, and that actually escalated it and elevated. Like we need to do that kind of dissecting of these big events, and that, to be honest with you, feels very, to me, necessary and I think luxurious.
Yeah, I think it's a very articulate way to make the same point that I'm making.
And schools are doing this. I mean, they do it. They try to do it. It does get. It's something that I wish we could give more time to and attention to. But we should be debriefing every event to say what could we have done as the adults to prevent us from getting to where we got.
Great. Thanks. That's all.
Thank you. I just have a couple of quick questions. And this is just like I would be curious as we have the data to look to track students, like if they're getting suspended in kindergarten, are they also getting suspended in first grade, second grade? And if there's a way to look like at a student's experience in, even just a couple of grades, I think that will be helpful to see if interventions are working. That's just what I'm thinking about. And then I just had two other questions, which I am excited to see more opportunity to learn about restorative practices. But I'm curious what the time and space looks like for practice for educators, so that they can feel it and embody it and change their mindset and use it. And then kind of like on the second part to that question is just how are we getting feedback from our staff about what they need to be able to do, to be able to create the kinds of environments that we need. I know we have the TNTP survey, and I know that we have a lot of groups that meet, but I'm just curious, like, how are we getting more feedback from educators about what they need to be able to do what we're asking them?
I mean, we have to live this. So, the assertion is, and every school, when they meet for professional development, should circle up once a month. Every classroom advisory or morning meeting should be circling up every week. And that's a tough ask for high schools, to move the chairs aside and to actually do that. Although I was in a classroom today and they did it, and it was beautiful at Deering. We also are culture coordinators. We meet in a circle and we are kind of living it, and we're trying to bring our problems of practice to a circle where we do this work. But the restorative practices, it's a long game. 80%, and that's one of the trainings that we offer to schools, is that 80% of the work is happening before something happens. So it's about culture setting and what's happening in advisory and what's happening kind of generally about how we respond to low-level stuff, how we use effective statements, and kind of really try to reflect back what students are feeling and experiencing throughout the day. That's the work that takes a lot of time, and there's no one PD that's going to bring everyone up to speed for that. We have to live it and practice it. And that is tough to do. I don't know if every school is circling up once a month. And we need to be doing it at our district leadership meetings. And if we say we don't have the time, or we're in a room that isn't conducive to that, it's a tough sell for educators to do that in a classroom with 22 kids and 22 desks and everything else. So it takes a lot of work. And we're chipping away at it. We're building our internal capacity. We have wonderful partners in the community, but it does not feel like enough because we're acutely aware of the needs in front of us right now.
Thank you.
Just to add, so I got an email a few weeks ago from one of our elementary schools saying, I've got staff asking for more training on restorative practices. And I was like, awesome. And so Chris and I are doing two different sessions on introduction to restorative practices for elementary educators, one at the end of October and one in December at two different locations, to make those opportunities available for more staff. And the sign up looks good. I've been following it in Vector. So just to your point about how do we take feedback from people and then offer matching opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay. Thank you. Anything else from you on that? Okay. Beautiful. Then I think we're going to keep moving. So up next, we have some old business to do, which is the consideration and action for the proposed changes to policy BED, remote participation to board meetings. So I'm going to ask if there's a motion. Yes? Did I miss something?
Minutes? Or
We did minutes. We did them. No, but that's good. We'll keep each other on track. Do I have a motion for this consideration? Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Is there a second? Thank you, Vice Chair Bondo. Are there any questions from the board about this policy? And then I'll give you just the floor in just a second. I just want to see if there's any public comment first, and then I'll turn it open to discussion. If there's any public comment on policy BED, now would be the time. Okay, I see no one here, no one online. So we're going to go ahead and close public comment. And is there any discussion from the board? Board Member BerryDunn, I know you have an amendment that you'd like to talk us through.
Thank you, Chair. My question was going to be a procedural one. So
there it is.
There we go. So I actually, I'm not seeing it in board docs, but I emailed to all of the members of the board the version of policy BED that I am moving forward as an amendment to the motion on the table.
Yes.
Would you like me to explain it?
Yes,
Okay.
I think if you wanted to go through the high level changes, that would be great.
Okay, so the first material change is that I just included a clarification that for the purposes of this policy, we're talking about business meetings and not committee meetings. Retaining the concept that physical presence for public meetings is preferred, and when physical presence is not practicable, getting a little bit, just taking a slightly different approach to the discussion within paragraph 2 and then subparagraphs about remote participation around circumstances including illness, concerns of contagion, and my proposed amended version continues to include the possibility of somebody being temporarily outside of the area governed by the board and facing significant difficulties in traveling to the physical location of the meeting. And then I also added in or other situation which in the board member's discretion makes in-person participation impracticable while meaningful remote participation remains possible. The amended version retains the concept of needing to notify the board chair as far in advance as possible. And I added in a subparagraph that says board members are expected to demonstrate the same level of engagement during a meeting, whether they're attending in person or participating remotely. And I just wanted to make a quick note about the approach that I took, specifically about the board members' discretion governing whether it's an appropriate reason to not be in person. I know in our last conversation about this policy at the last board meeting, we were talking about privacy concerns, and there might be some reasons why a board member might not feel as though they can attend in person, and it might be a very sensitive reason. And I don't feel like it's the board chair's responsibility to be keeping tabs on, are you in Portland or are you out of Portland and all those sorts of things. So the way I attempted to strike that balance was to leave the reason up to the board member's discretion, but also add in the expectation that the level of engagement remained the same.
Thank you, Board Member BerryDunn. I really appreciate the nuance that you were able to capture within the adjusted language, and I felt like it kind of got to that balance of we want people to be here in person, but we also understand we need flexibility to remove barriers and also, to just continue to make board service and meetings accessible. Any other board discussion?
I'll just say thank you. Yeah, I think one thing I did want to say last meeting that I didn't say was like that wanting people people here and feeling good that people are here might not necessarily be like how somebody else is looking at their experience, and it actually might can be a little selfish because it's like that it feels good for you, but then somebody else might not necessarily need this to feel like they can participate or feel good about the work they're doing. So I think, yeah, I would have never found the language to put it like this. So I appreciate the
Leave
work
it to a lawyer.
to articulate that. Yeah, I definitely do. Because I think it encompasses that conversation we're having very well.
Thank you. Board Member Opperman?
Yes, I think the wording is excellent. I do want to say that on our retreat to goals on the weekend where we all were there was infinitely better than the two previous ones where we couldn't all be together for good reasons. And I appreciate everyone sharing openly.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Yes, Board Member BerryDunn.
Chair, do I need to make a motion to move the amendment forward?
Yeah, we're gonna, Robert's rules is fleeting me at this time of night. No, you brought in a motion to the table. I would be looking for.
There's the motion to discuss policy BED, and then I want to bring an amendment. So, sorry, I interrupted you. I apologize.
When you can finish your sentence, it's okay.
So, no, I'm asking whether, so the active motion is, I believe it was Board Member Opperman's motion to discuss the policy. And
yes.
So do I need
You brought forward a motion of an amendment. You didn't use those words, but I gave you the assumption that that's what you're doing.
And I need a second, correct?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Board Member Opperman. So now the motion that is on the floor is the amended motion, so that when we are voting, we will be taking a vote on the amended motion with your amendment, unless there are any changes to the amendment on the floor.
And then we have to.
I have to vote to amend first?
Then you vote.
Yes.
Well, thank goodness we got an expert in the room. All right. So could any other board discussion?
No.
Right, I'm going to start to get punchy. Let's move this along. So we're going to vote to amend. I need a roll call, please.
Board Member Ali. Board Member Bilyeu.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bondo.
Yes.
Board Member BerryDunn.
Yes.
Board Member Figdor. Board Member Grant.
Yes.
Board Member Noor.
Yes.
Board Member Opperman.
Yes.
Chair Lentz.
Yes. So the motion is now amended, and now we will vote to pass the amended motion. So can you please call the roll? Again, we are voting for the consideration and action to approve the proposed changes with the amendment to policy BED, remote participation in board meetings.
Board Member Ali. Board Member Bilyeu.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bondo.
Yes.
Board Member BerryDunn.
Yes.
Board Member Figdor. Board Member Grant.
Yes.
Board Member Noor.
Yes.
Board Member Opperman.
Yes.
Chair Lentz.
Yes. So the motion passes. We're going to move to new business. I do need to leave to go to the restroom. Does anyone else need a recess, or can I leave and come back? Let me know what you need. Does anyone else need a recess?
Keep going.
Okay, keep going.
Great. I'm going to welcome up our Executive Director of HR to do our personnel moves.
BerryDunn first.
Can we do personnel first so that you're here for the MainePERS? We'll call the votes because we have to do the votes for either one.
Vicky can.
I can do it.
Hello.
Okay, so the first agenda item I have for you this evening is consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, which is the election of teacher candidates probationary. I think we have 7 teachers on that list this evening.
Thank you for your patience. Okay, do I have a motion? Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Do I have a second? Thank you, Vice Chair Bondo. We do not have public comment on personnel items. Are there questions from the board?
I hate to interject this, but without Sarah or Nylat here, you might not have a quorum because I don't vote on
Let's
these.
stepped away as well.
1,
You have 4.
2, 3, 4, right.
MainePERS?
Unless, I mean, I've not voted out of courtesy. If we want to move this along, I'm happy to vote. And there's Nylat. So.
Oh, yeah, we need you, we need you, we need you.
Yeah. Now you're good.
Always.
I filibustered long enough for you.
So general discussion? No. Okay. By roll call vote,
Board Member Ali, Board Member Billiou,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bondo,
Yes.
Board Member Bryden,
yes.
Board Member Figdor, Board Member Grant,
Abstain.
Board Member Noor,
Yes.
Board Member Opperman,
Yes.
Chair Lentz, absent. Ready for your next.
Thank you. Our next is the consideration and approval of the one-year only teachers. There are 2 people on that list.
Wonderful. For this item, do I have a motion? Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Do I have a second? Thank you, Board Member Billiou. We do not have public comment on personnel items. Are there questions from the board? Is there any general discussion from the board? Okay. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Board Member Ali, Board Member Billiou,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bondo,
Yes.
Board Member Bryden,
Yes.
Board Member Figdor, Board Member Grant,
Abstain.
Board Member Noor,
Yes.
Board Member Opperman,
Yes.
Chair Lentz.
Yes.
So that motion passes. We now have consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, election of school administrators.
Great. And these are actually a couple of management positions in our departments. And there's no little bio like I normally put on there. I was hoping to have them come tonight. It's a long meeting, so we've waited, and they will be, at least one of them has confirmed joining us at our meeting on the 15th to be formally introduced to the board. But this is, of course, our formality to ensure that we can start paying them. So that's why we have them there today. So Heather Peters and Jen Montague, who are going to be an accounting manager and a director for food services.
Beautiful. So do we have a motion to approve these personnel items, election of school administrators? Thank you, Board Member Bryden. Is there a second? Thank you, Board Member Opperman. We don't take public comment on personnel items. Any questions from the board? Any general discussion? Not about an individual, but from the board? Okay, seeing none, then by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of these personnel items. School administrators, Dr. Scallon, will you please call the roll?
Board Member Ali, Board Member Billiou,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bondo,
Yes.
Board Member Bryden,
Yes.
Board Member Figdor, Board Member Grant,
Abstain.
Board Member Noor,
Yes.
Board Member Opperman,
Yes.
Chair Lentz.
Yes, so the motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of those wonderful new additions to our team. Now we're going to move back to new business. First read of a contract with BerryDunn to manage reconciling of MainePERS reporting for employees and retirees prior to January 2024.
Good evening for the 4th time, I believe. Tonight, I'm going to give you an update on our work to reconcile MainePERS and a proposed contract with BerryDunn. This is going to come to you as an action item that we will do a vote on either at the October 15th meeting or perhaps after the Finance Committee meeting on October 27th. The reason for that is that we are still awaiting legal guidance on exactly how to approach an adjustment to our budget to accommodate the large financial piece of this. So just want to acknowledge that on the front end of this, but did not want to wait to give you an update on this as it's a significant ask. And so wanted to put that in front of it. Also want to acknowledge the late hour on this. And so don't want this to be the only time that we discuss this, but do want to have this as it's a timely update. For the last 9 months, we've been working to reconcile MainePERS accounting. As a reminder, and this should be an update, we've been making estimated payments to MainePERS all along. And so this is not a question about whether or not MainePERS has the funds from PPS. This is a question of making sure that the reconciling of accounts is up to date. Second, a thank you to our partners at PEA, and in particular their president, Carrie Dowdy, members of MainePERS staff and BerryDunn, who've been working together with our staff in finance to reconcile accounts that have been going on for 9 months. This has been a cross-collaboration and a collaborative work to do this very intense work. The initial focus, as you know, was on reconciling reporting from July 22 to December of 22. This was in alignment to payroll challenges that happened in the 22-23 school year. Simultaneously, we've been working with ADP and with MainePERS to create templates and reports within the new payroll system. And the teacher report has recently been approved by MainePERS. And so we are now in a spot where we are able to start to share with them reporting for the new ADP data. And so that's historical or background information. As we've done this, the working group has identified more historical challenges that have caused this shift in approach as we've looked at this window. So the examples of additional challenges that we've found is that there are reporting errors that exist outside of the 22-23 window. When these errors have been corrected in the past, they've not always been corrected or adjusted in that month, but sometimes they've been adjusted in subsequent months. And so what's that meant is that when we thought about looking at correcting it within a window of time, sometimes those corrections happen outside that window of time. And so it hasn't been that we could adjust just within that window. A third piece is that we looked at a sample of 14 randomly selected retirees from the July 2023 window. And 12 of those had MainePERS reporting errors at some point within their reporting. And that the errors range from small tens of dollars to $12,000 in the case of one employee. And so these are examples of additional challenges that have been identified. What this has meant is that the group that, again, involves members of MainePERS, members of our teachers union, and the accounting firm BerryDunn, has chosen to look at a new piloted approach. And we are still in the piloting phase of this. And so we'll need to provide another update on this. But it is looked at piloting, not just looking at an employee through a window of time or all employees within a window of time, but looking at a single employee for their whole duration of time and correcting for it. And initial piloting of it has seen success. And so we have piloted this with 20. We have 40 more that are in the pilot phase right now, and should have some more updates on it. And so what this has meant is that we're looking at an employee throughout their whole duration. We're making any necessary corrections all at one time. It would allow us to communicate to an employee that they've been reviewed and are now complete, and so no longer a wait. We're able to then prioritize recent retirees and those who are close to retirement. So somebody who is in their 5th year, we are able to deprioritize, and somebody who's recently retired, we're able to prioritize. And so there's some interest in doing that. And as I shared, and actually this could be updated based on a meeting we had yesterday, that we are actually doing 2 groups at different phases. So we've done a pilot for 20, and we have 2 groups, one that's being looked at by MainePERS and one that is in the data pool on our side right now. So we have 40 going through the second phase of the piloting. And so we have an adjustment here. This work is extremely labor intensive, and it's labor intensive by everybody that is involved in this. And so it's labor intensive with the work that Carrie Dowdy on the PEA is giving towards this work. And so we need to acknowledge that. It's labor intensive with our partners at MainePERS. And it's labor intensive on the strain that it is putting on our finance department. And that is simply the case, and we must acknowledge that. And so we also don't want to discount that this is essential work and it needs to remain a priority. And so we are proposing a contract with BerryDunn to oversee and facilitate this work. They would take on this work from the PPS finance side of it. And so they would do everything from pulling the files from our payroll system to reconciling the files in partnership with MainePERS, determining and keeping a record of all necessary adjustments, maintaining a file of all reviewed employees, and ensuring that communication happens with employees once their records are reviewed. And so what this would allow is it would allow our finance staff as well as myself to be able to, one, ensure that this is happening, right? Because we would still have staff able to dedicate to this, but we would actually have more capacity working on this, and our Portland Public School staff would be able to shift to focus on other responsibilities that currently are in tension or not getting served at the same level because of this work going towards it. This is currently an unbudgeted piece. We did not budget because we did not anticipate the amount of challenge that we would need to address in this. And we went and negotiated with BerryDunn pretty significantly on this to get to a cost of $500,000. Because this is unbudgeted, because this is likely work that will continue beyond just 1 year, I thought it was important to bring it before the board because contracts can actually be signed and agreed to by the superintendent without this, but I thought it was important to actually bring it to you and to have that. But we do need to go through and understand really the budget ramifications, what adjustments would be needed to the budget, and recognizing that this is a substantial piece that is currently not budgeted, what that means from an aspect of changing the budget on this scale. Because typically in Maine, budget adjustments are assumed for small budget adjustments, right? So where you have, you assume $100,000 for a cost and it turns out to be 110 and you shift a little bit of money, right? There's structures for that. There's not the same type of structure for a $500,000. And so we're trying to understand exactly what options are available for that. And that's where we're looking for legal advice at this point, still around this question. And so the big updates that I just want you to take from this is that, as I've shared, we do have more challenges in this than originally anticipated. The good news is that I do think we are getting to the sort of like bottom of really understanding the challenges. The piloting in the initial 20 does seem to uncover. We're now looking at the new 40 with the idea of, does this process truly identify the errors? We're looking at ones where we know what the challenges are, as well as new cases to really pressure test. Does it pull up all of the errors? And does it identify all of them? And then three, the third takeaway is recognizing that the amount of labor that is involved in this is how do we get this so that it is not taken away from the capacity of an already strained system, but looking at an outside vendor to do this work. And so that is where there's an ask that will come to you or is here today around this, and that is the contract that you see in board docs.
What questions are from the board? Yes, Board Member Opperman.
Just a point of information. If we're going back to 1990, is there an estimate of how many employees will be examined?
I don't have that. I mean, we have 1,400 and something approximate 1,440 full-time employees right now. It will be significant.
So this seems 500,000 is a bargain.
I don't think it'll be that high, but it will be significant. Yes.
Are you talking about the number of staff or the dollars for the contract?
I said the dollars.
Oh, the dollars?
The dollars for the contract is very reasonable.
Yeah, and I mean
the number of people.
Other questions? Yeah, Board Member Bryden.
Thank you, Chair. So just to make sure I understand, so there's 1,400 employees in the district right now. I assume that the number of people who will be reviewed will be greater than that because people have left the district. I'm curious about whether there is a floor, like if somebody worked for the district for 2 months, do they get reviewed? Is there, are there guardrails?
They would get reviewed. There isn't a guardrail because right now, one, our commitment is to make sure that employees that work for us are kept whole and that they get what they have earned. And second, our legal obligation is to that as well. And so it makes sense if we're going through this process to do it. So, yeah.
Okay. My other question, my only other question, has to do with, so I heard you say something along the lines of, it's $500,000 for 1 year, but it might go beyond 1 year. I'm curious about how the contract is being structured and what incentive we are putting in to get this wrapped up in 1 year. I'm curious about how that's being structured, and if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. We don't have an incentive right now around that. I will tell you that everybody who's involved in this is interested in that. We could explore an idea around an incentive. I'm not sure how exactly we would do that, but that's something we could explore with them around incentivizing it and looking at additional capacity.
Yeah, I don't know that incentive is necessarily the correct word, but like the expectation. I would think, that's a significant investment of money for services rendered, and I would think that the time frame could be very clear.
Yeah, I think there's two things that have come up in conversations since initially putting this up in terms of informal conversations. Is one is putting in some language up to, right? So that there's a ceiling on this for like initial approval. And then the second is what you raise. BerryDunn also has limited capacity, right? They get to a certain spot where they have no more capacity at which to put towards this. And as we've shared and talked about here before, MainePERS is not the most simple situation. And so we need to make sure that the people who are doing this work understand our payroll and what they're looking at and how it reconciles to MainePERS. But we can explore that question.
Okay, and I apologize, one more I just thought of. So let's say for the purposes of this question, that it's $500,000 for 1 year, and that's the contract. I noted that one of the bullet points on the slide is that BerryDunn will communicate with employees once the records are reviewed. I'm curious about if somebody comes back 2 years from now and has a question, will BerryDunn be available to address their question?
The intent is not to have BerryDunn. The intent is that BerryDunn is providing to us a file that says, here's exactly what issues were identified. And there's an ongoing conversation right now with MainePERS about once an employee's file's reviewed and complete, because it's being done in partnership with them, right? So BerryDunn's not taking over the work of MainePERS. BerryDunn is taking over the work that PPS is doing of pulling the employee files, doing the review. One of the questions to MainePERS is about whether at the end of the review, they would be able to send out a new employee benefits report that would include a letter that says, you've been reviewed and here it is. And that's an open question right now of their ability to do that. And if they're not, then we would have BerryDunn send out a letter that then directs them to the portal and what they could see there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and I would just add, and Ryan, see if this is wrong, but I think we'll get a better idea as the pilots continue to unfold about the pacing that we can expect. And then that should give us a roadmap for how long it should take. So I think that we'll have more information soon, and then we'll be able to hold accountable to that.
That's exactly right. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Vice Chair Bondo, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Superintendent, I just need to get a sense of the, when I see the cost of the services, and it's about a year, and I look at the reconcile file they're going to review, and I just wonder, we try to anticipate also the cost of those reconcile files. The process are about us making up those loss from for the employee benefits? Are we going to wait after a year, or everything can be ongoing process?
So the way that, if I understand your question right, is basically the current proposal in partnership with MainePERS is that about 20 employees at a time would be reviewed. So they would do them in batches, and that they would update the records at 100 at a time. And there's a reason for that, because the way that records get updated in MainePERS has to be manual, and it has to be by month. And so they want to have enough employees to pull up a month. And so then they would do it 100 at a time. And then we would always have an ongoing of how much we were off in terms of our estimated payment at the 20, and then obviously ongoing from there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Just a quick comment. I mean, I just want to thank Carrie for your commitment to finding solutions to make all of our staff whole. I think no one could have ever imagined that as we started to find issues in payroll, that it would have led us to this path. And I also just want to thank Superintendent Scallon for his commitment to excellence around this and repairing all the harm that has been done, both in numbers and reputation and trust. And I just think that, I just asked the board, this is a long process that we are still going to be in. Like Ryan said, it's going to be more than a year before this is completed. And this is just something that is going to be on our plate. So I just appreciate all of your engagement and holding of this. And with that, I'm going to move us to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? That was a Bryden and then an Opperman and then a raise of hands to adjourn. Thank you. Yes, affirmative and adjourning. It's 10:26. You're adjourned.